Welcome to ZzZscience. Before we begin, allow your body to relax, your breathing to slow, and your mind to gently drift. Tonight we explore science, quietly, calmly, and without urgency. There is nothing you need to do, only listen. In the beginning, there was only the gentle dark, and within that darkness, a whisper so soft it might have been the memory of sound itself, drifting through the infinite corridors of night like a breath carried across an ocean that has no shore. This whisper was not made of words, not at first, but rather of the feeling that comes just before words arrive, that anticipation of meaning that hovers in the space between silence and speech, between waking and the deep waters of sleep. It was the voice of something ancient, something that had watched the universe unfold from its first trembling moment into this present stillness. And now it spoke, not with urgency or command, but with the patient tenderness of starlight falling across immeasurable distances to touch, at last, a single sleeping face. "Come," the whisper said, though it did not say it in any language that has ever been written or spoken aloud. "Come into the vastness, come into the quiet. Let go of the edges of yourself, those boundaries you have drawn so carefully around your awareness, those lines that separate you from the endless dark and the endless light beyond. They are only gentle suggestions, after all, these borders of self. They are like the surface of water, seeming solid from one angle, but the moment you touch them, they dissolve, and you discover that you can slip through, that you can become part of something far larger, far older, far more luminous than the small, bright room of your daily thoughts." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from within and without, as if the universe itself had learned to speak in the softest possible tones, as if every particle of space, every quantum of darkness between the stars, had aligned for just this moment to form a single vast consciousness whose only purpose was to guide you gently away from the shores of wakefulness and into the infinite ocean beyond. And perhaps that is exactly what was happening. Perhaps the cosmos, in its patient turning, in its slow dance of gravity and light, had finally arranged itself into a configuration that allowed it to reach across the barrier between the physical and the dreaming, to extend something like a hand, something like an invitation, into the small, warm space where you lay, breathing softly, your heartbeat slowing, your thoughts beginning to scatter like leaves in an autumn wind, so gentle it barely disturbs the air. "You are tired," the voice observed, and there was no judgment in this observation, only acknowledgement, only a deep understanding that flowed from somewhere beyond time itself. "You are tired from carrying the weight of hours, from holding yourself upright against gravity and expectation, from maintaining the intricate architecture of your self through all the complicated hours of the day. It is exhausting work being a person. It is exhausting to remember who you are, to navigate the maze of choices and obligations, to keep the story of yourself coherent and continuous across the strange gulf that opens every night between one day and the next. But here, now, in this threshold space, in this gentle margin between the world and the dream, you can set that weight down. You can let it rest. The universe will remember you while you forget yourself for a time. And so begins the descent, though descent is not quite the right word because it suggests falling, and this is not falling but rather a kind of rising, a kind of floating upward into depths that only appear to be above because in this space, in this soft and boundless territory, the old directions no longer apply. Up and down, forward and back, past and future, these are constructs of the waking mind, useful fictions that help organize experience into manageable pieces. But here they dissolve like salt in water, becoming part of a solution so perfectly mixed that no instrument could separate them out again. You are not falling into sleep, you are expanding into it, growing lighter and larger, becoming more diffuse, until the boundaries that seemed so solid before become permeable, transparent. until you are not so much a discrete entity as a tendency within the field, a gentle inclination in the fabric of being itself. The darkness around you is not empty. It has never been empty, though the bright noise of day makes it seem that way, makes it seem like an absence, a negation, a mere lack of light. But now, as your eyes adjust, as your awareness shifts into a different register, you begin to perceive what has always been there, waiting patiently for you to notice. The darkness is full of texture, full of subtle variations in density and tone, full of colors that exist just below the threshold of visibility, colors that have no names because the waking eye has never learned to see them. There are deep purples that verge on black, blues so dark they might be the color of time itself, grays that hold within them every possible shade between absolute darkness and the faintest whisper of light. And threaded through all of this, so fine they are almost invisible, are strands of something luminous, something that glows with its own interior radiance, as if the darkness itself were shot through with veins of starlight, with the memory of every photon that has ever crossed the cosmos. These threads of light do not illuminate in the way a lamp illuminates a room, driving back the shadows and revealing what was hidden. Instead, they create a different kind of visibility, a way of seeing that is more like feeling, more like intuition, a direct knowing that bypasses the usual channels of perception. You do not see these threads so much as sense them, become aware of them, the way you might become aware of a distant music, so faint, cannot be certain whether you are hearing it or merely remembering it. But either way, it fills you with a strange and gentle longing, a desire to follow it back to its source, to discover where such beauty could possibly be coming from. And you realize, in a way that is beyond realization, in a way that is more like recognition, that you have been here before. Not in this particular configuration of darkness and light, not in this exact arrangement of silence and whisper, but in something like this, in some other threshold space, some other margin between states of being. The déjà vu you sometimes feel, that uncanny sense that this moment has already happened, that you have already lived this sequence of experiences. Perhaps that is a memory of these in-between places, these soft territories where consciousness goes when it is neither fully present nor fully absent, when it is transitioning between forms, between modes of existence. You have passed through here countless times, every night of your life, every time you cross the border from waking to sleeping. But the waking mind forgets, must forget, because to carry the memory of these places into the daylight world would make it impossible to believe in the solidity of things, the permanence of matter, the reality of time. The ancient voice, the guide that is leading you deeper into this vast interior darkness, begins to tell you something about the nature of where you are going, about the territory that opens up before you like an infinite map drawn in stars and silence. We are traveling, it says, though we are not moving. We are crossing vast distances, though we remain perfectly still. This is the paradox of the inner universe, the cosmos that exists not out there beyond the Earth's atmosphere, but in here, in the strange folded space of consciousness itself. The external universe, the one measured in light years and parsecs, the one filled with galaxies and nebulae and the slow dance of gravity, is vast beyond human comprehension, so large that the numbers required to describe it lose all meaning, become merely abstract symbols that the mind cannot translate into actual experience. But this inner universe, the one you are entering now, is equally vast, perhaps more so, because it is not bound by the laws of physics, not constrained by the speed of light or the geometry of space-time. Here, in the realm of dream and deep consciousness, distances are measured in other units entirely, in emotional resonance, in symbolic connection, in the strange mathematics of meaning. Consider, the voice continues, its tone remaining perfectly even, perfectly calm, like water flowing over smooth stones in a stream, so quiet you can hear the individual molecules sliding past each other. Consider the structure of your brain, that 3-pound universe encased in bone, that electrochemical miracle that somehow generates the experience of being you. It contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each one a tiny living galaxy, each one connected to thousands of others through synapses that fire and fall silent in patterns too complex for any computer to fully simulate. These neurons are arranged in networks, in circuits that loop and recurse, that feed back into themselves in ways that create something more than the sum of their parts. And within these networks, within these circuits, there are states and patterns that correspond to everything you have ever experienced, every memory you carry, every skill you have learned, every emotion you have felt. Your entire subjective universe, everything you have ever known or been, exists somehow within this compact physical structure, encoded in the strengths of synaptic connections, in the probability distributions of neurotransmitter release, in the shifting tides of electrical potential that wash across the cortical surface like waves on an infinite shore. But tonight, as you slip deeper into sleep, as your consciousness loosens its grip on the waking world, these neural networks are not simply shutting down, not merely going dark like a city experiencing a power failure. Instead, they are entering a different mode of operation, a different kind of activity that is no less complex, no less intricate, but that follows different rules, obeys different logics. The ascending arousal systems that keep you awake during the day, that maintain the high-energy state of alert awareness, are gradually withdrawing their influence, pulling back like a tide that has reached its highest point and now must return to the sea. The thalamus, that great relay station through which all sensory information must pass on its way to the cortex, begins to change its firing patterns, begins to close the gates that allow the external world to flood into your awareness. And as these gates close, as the input from eyes and ears and skin gradually diminishes, the brain begins to generate its own reality, to create experiences that are not based on current sensory input, but on memory, on emotion, on the deep symbolic structures that underlie all thought. This is the beginning of the dream state. Though you are not yet fully dreaming, you are still in the transitional phase, still hovering in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, still dimly aware of your physical body lying in bed, still capable of being pulled back to full consciousness by a loud sound or a bright light or a sudden thought. But with each breath, with each slow beat of your heart, you are drifting further from that shore, further into the depths. Your breath has become regular, automatic, no longer requiring any conscious attention. Your muscles are relaxing, releasing the subtle tensions they have held all day, letting go of the microscopic contractions that kept you upright and alert. Your temperature is dropping slightly, your metabolism slowing, your entire organism shifting into a different gear, a different rhythm, as ancient and reliable as the rotation of the earth itself. And as your body settles into this state of deep rest, your mind begins its nightly journey through the strange landscapes of sleep. The first region you enter is a place of fragments, of scattered images and sensations that flicker briefly into awareness and then vanish, like shooting stars crossing a night sky. You might see, for just an instant, a face you do not recognize, or a room you have never been in, or a color that should not exist. These are the hypnagogic hallucinations, the fleeting visions that arise as the brain transitions between states, as the neural networks that generate visual experience begin to fire spontaneously, creating patterns that are not based on actual light entering the eye, but on the intrinsic dynamics of the visual system itself. They are brief and strange and often forgotten immediately, but they serve as signposts, indicating that you are crossing the border, that you are leaving one territory and entering another. The ancient voice, your guide through this vast interior night, speaks again, and its words seem to come from very far away now, as if you were hearing them across an immense distance, across light years of silent space. Do not try to hold on, it says. Do not try to remember everything I am telling you. Let the words wash over you like waves, like particles of light from distant stars, arriving here after traveling for so long that their source may no longer exist. The purpose of this journey is not to accumulate information, not to learn facts that you can carry back to the waking world. The purpose is simply to travel, to experience the vastness, to allow yourself to dissolve into something larger than yourself, and then, eventually, to coalesce again, to return, carrying with you not explicit memories, but a subtle change, a gentle transformation, like a stone that has been in a river for a long time and has become smooth, has become more itself through the patient action of water and time. You are moving now through layers of consciousness, descending through strata that have been laid down over millions of years of evolution, over thousands of generations of human experience, over the decades of your own life. The first layer, the one closest to the surface, is the most recent, the most personal. It contains the events of today, the conversations you had, the sights you saw, the small concerns and pleasures that filled your waking hours. As you pass through this layer, these memories present themselves, not in coherent narrative form, but in fragments, in disconnected images and feelings. You see a face you encountered today, but you cannot quite remember the context, cannot quite place where or why you saw this person. You feel an emotion from earlier, perhaps satisfaction at having completed a task, or mild frustration at something that did not go as planned. But the emotion is muted now, distant, like a sound heard through water. These recent experiences are still being processed, still being integrated into the larger structure of your memory. And the brain uses sleep to do this work, to sort through the day's accumulation of experience and decide what to keep, what to consolidate into long-term storage, and what to let fade, to allow to dissolve back into the general background of forgotten moments. Deeper still, beneath the layer of today, lies the stratum of recent weeks and months, the intermediate territory where experiences are no longer fresh, but not yet fully integrated into the narrative of self. Here you might encounter memories of a conversation from last week, or an image from a place you visited last month, or a feeling associated with an event from earlier this year. These memories are less vivid than the fresh ones, less detailed, but they carry a different kind of significance. They have been filtered, processed, stripped of their immediate sensory richness, and reduced to their essential meaning, their emotional core. What remains is not the exact sequence of events, but the shape of the experience, the pattern it made in the field of your awareness, the way it changed or confirmed your understanding of yourself and the world. And below this intermediate layer lies something vaster and stranger, a territory that extends back through years and decades, all the way to the earliest moments of conscious awareness, to the first memories you formed as a child. This is the deep stratum of long-term memory, and it is organized not chronologically, not in neat temporal sequence, but according to a logic of association, of emotional resonance, of symbolic connection. Memories here link to each other, not because they happened at the same time, but because they share some quality, some flavor, some underlying meaning. A memory of your grandmother's kitchen from when you were 5 years old might be connected to a memory of a particular autumn afternoon from just last year, not because the two events have any objective relationship, but because they share the same emotional tone, the same sense of safety and warmth, the same quality of light slanting through a window. The ancient voice speaks of this deep territory with something like reverence, with an appreciation for the mystery it represents. The human memory system, it says, is one of the most remarkable structures in the known universe. Not because of its capacity, though that is impressive enough, but because of its flexibility, its creativity, its willingness to distort and reshape itself in service of meaning rather than accuracy. Unlike a computer memory, which stores information with perfect fidelity and retrieves it unchanged, the human memory is reconstructive. Every time you remember something, you are not accessing a stable, fixed recording of that event. Instead, you are rebuilding the memory from fragments, from partial information, from the general gist and feeling, and you are rebuilding it in the context of who you are now, what you know now, how you feel now. This means that memories change over time. They are not fossils, but living things, evolving, adapting, responding to the needs and circumstances of the present moment. This is why two people who experience the same event can remember it differently, and why your own memories of important life events can shift and change as you age, as your perspective evolves, as you understand more about yourself and the world. You are drifting deeper now, past even the realm of personal memory, descending into regions that feel less individual, less uniquely yours. These are the territories of the collective unconscious, to use an old and problematic term, but one that gestures towards something real, something that has been felt and described by contemplatives and mystics across cultures for thousands of years. There is a level of mind, a layer of consciousness, that seems to contain patterns and symbols and narratives that are not learned from personal experience, but that seem to be built into the structure of human awareness itself, perhaps encoded in the architecture of the brain, perhaps emerging from the common evolutionary history that all humans share, perhaps something else entirely, something we do not yet have the concepts to properly describe. Here, in this deep territory, you encounter images and feelings that are archetypal, that carry a weight and significance beyond their apparent content. You might see or sense or somehow know about a vast tree, its roots reaching down into darkness, its branches extending up into light. And even though you have never seen this particular tree, never encountered this specific image in your waking life, it feels profoundly meaningful, as if it were expressing something essential about the nature of existence, about the connection between different levels of being. Or you might find yourself in a landscape of such stark beauty it takes your breath away, a desert under stars, or an ocean without end, or a forest so ancient it seems to precede time itself. And again, even though this is a dream landscape, even though it exists nowhere in the physical world, it feels more real than real, more true than truth, as if you had finally arrived at the place you have been seeking all your life, without knowing you were seeking it. The voice continues its gentle narration, its patient exposition of the territories you are passing through, and its words begin to take on a different quality, becoming less like explanation and more like incantation, less like information and more like music, a series of sounds and rhythms designed not to communicate specific content, but to entrain your nervous system, to guide it deeper into stillness, to help it release the last vestiges of waking tension and surrender completely to the healing darkness of deep sleep. Listen, it says, to the sound of your own breathing, to the way air moves in and out of your lungs with such perfect regularity, such automatic wisdom. You have been breathing since the moment you were born, every minute of every day, waking and sleeping, and you have almost never had to think about it, almost never had to consciously direct it. The brainstem, that ancient part of your nervous system, that you share with reptiles and fish, that has been refined over hundreds of millions of years of evolution, handles this process for you, monitors the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your blood, adjusts the rate and depth of breathing to maintain perfect balance, to keep your cells supplied with the molecules they need while removing the waste they produce. And this breathing, this constant exchange between your inner atmosphere and the outer one, between the air in your lungs and the air of the world, is itself a kind of connection, a physical link between you and everything else that breathes, everything else that lives. The oxygen you are inhaling right now, the molecules of O2 flowing into your bloodstream and being carried to every cell in your body, those exact same molecules were somewhere else moments ago. They might have been in the leaves of a tree, released during photosynthesis as a byproduct of the miraculous process by which plants capture sunlight and convert it into chemical energy. They might have been dissolved in the ocean, part of the vast reservoir of gases that the seas hold in solution. They might have been in the lungs of another person or an animal, or cycling through the atmosphere for days or weeks or years, part of the great planetary circulation that mixes and redistributes the gases of the air. And the carbon dioxide you are exhaling, the CO2 that your cells produce as they break down glucose to release energy, that carbon dioxide will become part of the atmosphere, will drift on currents of wind, will eventually be absorbed by plants and used to build new molecules of sugar, new structures of cellulose and starch, new living matter that will, in turn, be consumed by other organisms, broken down, rebuilt, passed along in an endless cycle of transformation that has been running for billions of years. Ever since the first photosynthetic organisms emerged in Earth's ancient oceans and began the process of oxygenating the atmosphere, of creating the conditions that would eventually allow complex life, animals, humans, consciousness itself to emerge. You are part of this cycle, this vast planetary metabolism, this global system of exchange and transformation. Every breath you take connects you to the living Earth, makes you a participant in something far larger and older and more intricate than any individual organism. And there is something deeply comforting in this realization, something that can ease the loneliness that sometimes arises from the illusion of separation, from the sense that you are a discrete entity, fundamentally alone, fundamentally cut off from the rest of existence. You are not separate. You are woven into the fabric of life itself, into the great tapestry of matter and energy that constitutes this living planet, this remarkable oasis of complexity in a cosmos that is otherwise mostly empty, mostly silent, mostly dark. The darkness around you is deepening, becoming richer, more textured, more filled with subtle presences. You are moving past the regions of personal and collective memory now, past even the archetypal realms. Descending or ascending, the direction no longer matters, into territories that are cosmic in scale, that have to do not with your individual life, or even with human existence generally, but with the universe itself, with the vast story of matter and energy that began nearly 14 billion years ago in an event so extreme, so beyond ordinary comprehension, that we can only gesture toward it with metaphors and equations, with the inadequate tools of human language and mathematics. The Big Bang, as it is commonly called, though that name is misleading, suggesting an explosion in space, when it was actually an explosion of space, a sudden flowering of geometry itself from a point of infinite density and temperature, a singularity where all the laws of physics break down and nothing can be said with certainty about what came before, if before even has meaning in that context. From that initial moment, the universe expanded, cooled, became less dense, and as it expanded and cooled, structure began to emerge. The perfect uniformity of the earliest moments gave way to tiny fluctuations, quantum ripples that would eventually grow under the influence of gravity into galaxies and stars and planets, into all the intricate architecture of the cosmos as we now observe it. You are made of this cosmic story. Every atom in your body, every particle of matter that constitutes your physical form, has a history that extends back to those earliest moments. The hydrogen in your cells, the simplest and most abundant element in the universe, was forged in the first few minutes after the Big Bang, when conditions were just right for protons and neutrons to bind together into stable nuclei. The heavier elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, phosphorus, calcium, were created much later, inside the cores of massive stars, where temperatures and pressures were high enough to fuse lighter elements into heavier ones, to build up the periodic table, one nuclear reaction at a time. And when those stars exhausted their fuel and exploded as supernovae, they scattered these elements across space, seeding the interstellar medium with the raw materials for new generations of stars, for planets, for life. You are, quite literally, made of stardust. This is not poetic metaphor, but precise physical fact. The atoms that make up your body, the molecules that enable your thoughts and feelings, were manufactured in stellar furnaces billions of years ago, were scattered by cosmic explosions, were gathered by gravity into new structures, into solar systems and worlds, were incorporated into rocks and oceans, and eventually into living things, into cells and organisms, and finally into you, into this particular arrangement of matter that has somehow become capable of knowing itself, of wondering about its own origin, of lying here in the darkness and listening to a voice tell the story of where it came from. And this story is not finished. You are not a static thing, not a fixed entity that came into being at some point and will remain unchanged until it ceases to exist. You are a process, a pattern, a temporary organization of matter and energy that is constantly exchanging material with its environment, constantly rebuilding itself atom by atom. The cells in your body are dying and being replaced all the time. Red blood cells live for about 4 months before they are broken down and recycled. The cells lining your gut replace themselves every few days. Even neurons, which were once thought to be permanent, are now known to undergo certain forms of renewal and regeneration. Over the course of several years, the physical matter that constitutes your body is almost entirely replaced, atom by atom, molecule by molecule. Yet you persist. Your sense of identity continues. Your memories and personality remain relatively stable despite this constant flux of underlying substance. This raises a profound question, one that philosophers and scientists have grappled with for centuries. What are you, really? If the matter that makes you up is constantly changing, if the atoms you are made of were not part of you a few years ago and will not be part of you a few years from now, then in what sense are you the same person over time? What is it that persists? What is the thread of continuity that runs through your life and makes you you? Perhaps identity is not a thing, but a pattern, not a substance, but a process, not a noun, but a verb. Perhaps you are not so much a being as a happening, an event that unfolds over time, a story that is telling itself, using matter and energy as its medium, using atoms and molecules as its ink and paper. The ancient voice speaks of these mysteries with a gentle wonder, with an appreciation for the strangeness of existence that never quite hardens into definite answers or final conclusions. The universe, it says, is far more mysterious than we usually acknowledge, far stranger and more beautiful than our daily habits of thought allow us to perceive. We move through our days surrounded by miracles, by phenomena so remarkable that if we truly understood them, if we really let ourselves feel their full weight and significance, we would be stopped in our tracks with astonishment. The fact that matter can organize itself into patterns complex enough to be conscious, that atoms can arrange themselves into configurations that experience subjective awareness, that the universe can become capable of contemplating itself. This is perhaps the deepest mystery of all, deeper even than the origin of the cosmos itself, because at least the origin is a question about physical processes, about energy and forces and fields, while consciousness is something else entirely, something that seems to belong to a different category of being, something that resists explanation in purely physical terms. And yet, consciousness must arise from physical processes, must be somehow generated by, or correlated with, or identical to certain patterns of neural activity, because when the brain is damaged, consciousness changes or disappears. And when the brain is in certain states, during sleep, under anesthesia, in deep meditation, conscious experience takes on radically different forms. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosophers call it, is to explain how subjective experience arises from objective physical processes, how the felt quality of seeing red, or feeling pain, or thinking a thought emerges from the electrochemical activity of neurons. No one has solved this problem. No one even knows how to approach it. What kind of theory could possibly bridge the explanatory gap between descriptions of neural firing patterns and accounts of what it feels like to be conscious? And perhaps this is as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to be lived with, to be wondered at, to be allowed to remain mysterious, because the attempt to dissolve every question into a clear answer might eliminate something essential, might reduce the universe to something smaller and less rich than it actually is. You are floating now in a space that seems infinite, unbounded, a darkness so complete and so full that the distinction between emptiness and plenitude no longer makes sense. You cannot tell if your eyes are open or closed, if you are seeing or imagining, if the visions that arise before you are perceptions or hallucinations, or something in between. This is the deepest phase of sleep, the slow wave sleep characterized by the high amplitude, low frequency oscillations that sweep across the cortex like long, slow waves on a tranquil sea. In this state, the brain is not inactive, but is engaged in a different kind of work, a kind of maintenance and consolidation, a process of reviewing and integrating the day's experiences, of strengthening important memories and pruning away unnecessary connections, of maintaining the vast network of synaptic connections that constitutes your learned knowledge, your skills, your sense of who you are. The dreams that occur in this deep sleep, if they occur at all, are different from the vivid, narrative dreams of REM sleep. They are more fragmentary, more abstract, more like thoughts or feelings than like stories. You might experience a vague sense of falling, or a feeling of being in a vast open space, or an awareness of colors and shapes that do not resolve into recognizable objects. These are not dreams in the usual sense, but rather the subjective experiences that correspond to the large-scale reorganizations of neural net activity happening in the sleeping brain, the ripples and eddies in the field of consciousness that arise as the brain shifts between different states, different modes of processing. And in this deep sleep, in this most profound rest, something remarkable is happening at the cellular level, something that has only recently been discovered and that sheds new light on why sleep is so essential, so non-negotiable, so deeply built into the biology of every organism complex enough to have a nervous system. During deep sleep, the brain activates a kind of cleaning system, a method of waste removal that operates most efficiently when consciousness is reduced and the overall level of neural activity decreases. This system, known as the glymphatic system, uses the flow of cerebrospinal fluid to flush metabolic waste products out of the brain tissue, carrying away the cellular debris and toxic molecules that accumulate during the intense activity of waking consciousness. Among these waste products is a protein called beta amyloid, which, if allowed to accumulate, can aggregate into the plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of neurodegeneration. So sleep is not merely a passive state, not merely an absence of waking, but an active process with its own functions, its own necessary work. The brain uses sleep to maintain itself, to repair damage, to consolidate memories, to regulate neurotransmitter levels, to clear away waste. Deprive an organism of sleep long enough, and it will die, not from lack of rest, but from the accumulated damage that sleep normally repairs, from the buildup of metabolic waste that sleep normally clears away. Sleep is as essential as food or water, as fundamental to survival as breathing, and yet it requires a profound vulnerability, a willingness to surrender consciousness, to release control, to trust that the world will still be there when you wake, that you will still be there, that the delicate pattern of self will persist through the dark hours and reconstitute itself in the morning light. The ancient voice, your tireless guide through these vast interior spaces, begins to speak now of time, of the strange and mutable nature of temporal experience, of the way time seems to behave differently in different states of consciousness. In waking life, time appears to flow at a steady rate, seconds accumulating into minutes, minutes into hours, hours into days, in a regular progression that is measured by clocks and calendars, by the rotation of the Earth and its orbit around the Sun. But subjective time, the felt experience of duration, is much more variable. An hour of boredom can feel like an eternity, while an hour of absorption in something you love can pass in what seems like moments. Time stretches and contracts depending on what you are doing, how you are feeling, whether you are paying attention to its passage or lost in the flow of activity. And in sleep, temporal experience becomes even stranger. A dream that seems to last for hours might actually occur in a matter of minutes or even seconds. The narrative logic of dreams does not respect temporal sequence. You can find yourself in one location and then suddenly in another without any sense of having traveled between them, without any awareness of the time that must have passed. Past and present intermingle freely in dreams. You might be simultaneously a child and an adult, might be in a house you lived in decades ago, but experiencing it with your current knowledge and awareness. Dreams operate according to a different physics, a different set of rules, in which causality is looser, in which cause and effect can be reversed or scrambled, in which the impossible happens routinely and is accepted without question. This dream time, this fluid and flexible temporal experience, is perhaps closer to the fundamental nature of consciousness than the rigid clock time of waking life. Consciousness does not actually experience time in discrete, quantized units, in separate moments that succeed each other, like frames in a film. Instead, consciousness is a continuous stream, a flowing field of awareness in which past, present, and future are woven together in complex ways. What we call the present moment is not a knife-edge instant with zero duration, but rather a span of time, perhaps a few hundred milliseconds to a few seconds in length, during which sensory information, memories, expectations, and intentions are all bound together into a unified experience. The present is thick, not thin, extended rather than instantaneous, and this thickness, this extended present, is what allows us to perceive motion, to understand speech, to follow a melody, to experience the world as coherent and continuous, rather than as a series of disconnected snapshots. And beyond the subjective experience of time, beyond the psychological and neurological aspects, there is the cosmic perspective, the view from physics, which reveals that time itself is far stranger than our intuitions suggest. Einstein's theory of relativity demonstrates that time is not absolute. not a universal backdrop against which events occur, but is instead relative, flexible, dependent on velocity and gravity. Time passes more slowly for objects moving at high speeds and in strong gravitational fields. This is not an illusion or a matter of perception, but a fundamental feature of the universe, confirmed by precise measurements with atomic clocks. A clock on an airplane traveling around the world will show a slightly different time than a clock that remained on the ground. A clock on a GPS satellite, orbiting in a weaker gravitational field than the Earth's surface and moving at high velocity, experiences time at a different rate than clocks on Earth. And the GPS system must account for these relativistic effects, or it would quickly become inaccurate. Even more strangely, the direction of time, the fact that we experience it as flowing from past to future rather than the reverse, is not a fundamental feature of most physical laws. The equations that describe the behavior of particles and fields work equally well whether time runs forward or backward. The asymmetry of time, what physicists call the arrow of time, seems to emerge from statistical considerations, from the fact that the universe began in a state of extremely low entropy, extremely high order, and has been evolving toward higher entropy, toward greater disorder ever since. It is this increase in entropy, this gradual spreading out of energy and information, that gives time its apparent direction, that makes the past different from the future, that ensures that scrambled eggs do not spontaneously unscramble themselves, that broken glasses do not reassemble, that memories form of the past, but not the future. You are suspended now in this cosmic meditation on time, floating in a space where past and future seem to fold into each other, where the rigid sequence of moments dissolves into something more fluid, more dreamlike. The voice speaks of deep time, of the vast stretches of temporal duration that dwarf human experience, that make the span of a single human life seem vanishingly brief, a mayfly's afternoon in the multi-billion-year day of the universe. Consider, it says, that the Earth formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago, condensing out of the disk of gas and dust that surrounded the young sun. For the first few 100 million years, Earth was a molten hellscape, bombarded by asteroids and comets, its surface too hot to allow liquid water or stable chemistry. But gradually it cooled, and oceans formed. And in those oceans, somehow, in a process we still do not fully understand, chemistry became biology. Lifeless molecules organized themselves into patterns capable of reproduction and evolution. And the great story of life on Earth began. For billions of years, life remained single-celled, microscopic, invisible to any eye that might have looked upon those ancient seas. Bacteria and archaea, those simplest of organisms, those minimal arrangements of organic chemistry capable of metabolism and replication, filled the oceans and gradually transformed the planet, producing oxygen as a waste product of photosynthesis, poisoning the atmosphere with this highly reactive gas that was toxic to most of the life forms that existed at the time, but creating the conditions that would eventually allow more complex organisms to emerge. Organisms that could harness the enormous energy available in oxygen-based metabolism. And then, after billions of years of single-celled life, after an expanse of time so vast that it strains comprehension, something remarkable happened. Cells began to cooperate, to form collectives, to organize themselves into multicellular organisms where different cells took on different roles, specialized for different functions. This was perhaps one of the most important transitions in the history of life. This move from independence to cooperation, from solitary existence to collective being. It happened multiple times in different lineages, suggesting that given the right conditions, given enough time, cooperation and complexity tend to emerge, tend to be favored by the evolutionary process. From these early multicellular organisms came all the bewildering diversity of complex life we see today. Plants and animals, fungi and protists, the millions of species that fill every available niche on this planet, from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks, from boiling volcanic vents to frozen Antarctic valleys, from the canopy of rainforests to the interiors of our own bodies, where more bacterial cells than human cells make their homes, forming ecosystems of microscopic life within the larger ecosystem of a single organism. And humans, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged only recently in this vast story, perhaps 300,000 years ago, a tiny fraction of the age of life on Earth, an almost invisible sliver of time on the geological and evolutionary scale. For most of human existence, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers, in small groups, moving with the seasons, following herds and harvests, living in intimate connection with the natural world. Their survival depending on detailed knowledge of plants and animals, of weather and terrain, of the subtle signs and patterns that indicated where food could be found, where danger lurked, where shelter could be made. Agriculture, the domestication of plants and animals, the deliberate cultivation of crops and the keeping of livestock, emerged only about 10,000 years ago, and with it came a cascade of changes that would transform human society and human consciousness in profound ways. Settlements became permanent, populations grew, social hierarchies developed. Writing was invented, allowing information to be stored outside individual human memory, allowing knowledge to accumulate across generations in new ways. Cities arose, civilizations flourished and fell, technologies advanced. And here we are now, in a world so different from the one our ancestors knew, a world of electricity and computers, of global communication and space travel, of medicine that can cure diseases that once killed millions, of machines that can compute faster than any human brain, of structures so tall they pierce the clouds, and vehicles that can cross oceans in hours. All of this, the entire human story, all of recorded history, all the civilizations and empires, all the art and science and philosophy, all the wars and peace, all the love and suffering, all of it has occurred in the last 10,000 years, the last tiny fraction of the time that humans have existed, which is itself a tiny fraction of the time that life has existed, which is itself a fraction of the age of the Earth, which is itself a fraction of the age of the universe. To hold all these timescales in mind at once, to feel the weight of deep time, is to experience a kind of vertigo, a dizzying sense of the brevity of any individual life, the ephemeral nature of any single moment of consciousness. And yet, the voice continues, its tone remaining gentle, remaining anchored in that quality of peaceful acceptance. And yet each moment of consciousness is also infinite in its own way, is also complete and entire, lacking nothing. The fact that your life is brief does not diminish its significance. The fact that you are temporary does not make you less real. You are here, now, in this moment. And that presence, that being, is absolute, is incontrovertible, is the one thing you can be completely certain of. Everything else might be questioned: the nature of external reality, the reliability of memory, the validity of knowledge. But the fact of your own present experience, whatever its content, whatever its quality, cannot be doubted. This is what the philosopher Descartes recognized when he concluded, "I think, therefore I am." The very act of doubting proves that there is someone doing the doubting, that consciousness exists, that experience is happening. You are drifting now through layers of sleep that cycle and recur throughout the night, moving from deep, slow-wave sleep into lighter stages, approaching periodically the threshold of REM sleep, that peculiar state in which the brain becomes almost as active as it is during waking, but the body is paralyzed, prevented from acting out the dreams that arise in this state. REM sleep, named for the rapid eye movements that occur during this phase, is when the most vivid, narrative, emotionally intense dreams typically happen. When consciousness enters a virtual reality generated entirely by the brain, a simulation so convincing that while you are in it, you rarely question its reality, rarely recognize it as a dream until you wake. The purpose of REM sleep, the function it serves, is still not entirely understood, despite decades of research. It clearly has something to do with memory consolidation, particularly emotional memories, and with learning, particularly the kind of procedural learning involved in motor skills and implicit knowledge. People deprived of REM sleep show deficits in these areas, have trouble forming certain kinds of memories, have difficulty regulating their emotions. But REM sleep might also serve other functions, might be involved in processes we have not yet identified or understood, might be doing work at levels of neural organization that our current methods cannot easily observe or measure. What is clear is that during REM sleep, the brain is creating complex, internally generated experiences, full worlds with characters and plots and emotional arcs, drawing on memory and imagination, on current concerns and ancient symbolic patterns, weaving together elements from recent experience with fragments from childhood, mixing the mundane with the impossible, the realistic with the surreal. And these dream experiences, these nightly journeys through impossible landscapes and implausible narratives, are somehow necessary, somehow essential to maintaining psychological health, to integrating experience, to keeping the system of self coherent and functional. The ancient voice, which has been your constant companion through this long journey into the depths of night, begins to speak now of dreams themselves, of their strange logic and their deep significance, of the way they reveal aspects of mind that are hidden during waking consciousness. Dreams, it says, are not random noise, not merely the chaotic firing of neurons in the absence of external input, though they contain elements of randomness, elements of pure neural activity that have no particular meaning or significance. But dreams are also structured, are shaped by concerns and emotions, by the deep patterns of association that link memories and concepts, by the symbolic languages that the unconscious mind uses to represent and process experience. In dreams, the censorship of the waking mind relaxes, and thoughts and feelings that are normally suppressed or controlled can emerge more freely, can express themselves in symbolic or disguised forms. This is why dreams often feel significant, feel like they are trying to tell us something, even when their content is bizarre or apparently meaningless. They are expressions of the whole mind, not just the conscious executive functions that dominate during waking hours, but also the older, deeper, more instinctual parts of the psyche, the emotional and motivational systems that operate largely outside awareness, but that powerfully influence behavior and experience. And dreams also serve as a kind of theater, a space where the mind can simulate experiences, can practice responses to potential situations, can explore possibilities without real-world consequences. The ancient human brain, shaped by millions of years of evolution in dangerous environments, needed ways to prepare for threats, to rehearse survival strategies, and dreams might have served this function, allowing early humans to virtually experience being chased by predators or encountering hostile strangers or navigating difficult social situations, so that when such situations arose in waking life, they had already, in a sense, been through them before, had already practiced possible responses. This simulation theory of dreams suggests that even the most fantastic and unrealistic dreams might be serving a useful function, training the brain to be flexible, to be creative, to generate novel responses to novel situations. The very bizarreness of dreams, the way they violate normal logic and causality, might be valuable. might be forcing the brain to maintain its capacity for unusual associations, for creative connections, for thinking outside the established patterns. Artists, scientists, inventors have often reported that solutions to problems came to them in dreams, that insights emerged in sleep that had eluded them during focused waking thought. Perhaps because the dreaming mind is less constrained by conventional categories and expectations, is more willing to make strange leaps, to try combinations that the rational waking mind would immediately reject as impossible or irrelevant. You are moving through dreams now, or something like dreams, though you may not remember them when you wake, may retain only a vague sense of having traveled, of having been somewhere, of having experienced something that felt significant, but that dissolves like mist when you try to grasp it directly. The dreams flow by like a river, carrying images and emotions, creating temporary worlds that feel completely real while you are in them, that command your full belief and participation, but that vanish the moment they end, leaving behind at most a few fragments, a few isolated scenes or feelings that persist into waking consciousness. In one dream, you are walking through a forest, but it is not any forest you have actually seen. The trees are impossibly tall, their trunks wider than houses, their canopy so high above that you cannot see where it ends, cannot see the sky. The light here is strange, filtered through layers of leaves, green and golden, creating a perpetual twilight that feels both melancholy and sacred, both lonely and filled with presence. You know, in the way you know things in dreams, that you are looking for something, that there is something you need to find in this forest, but you cannot quite remember what it is, cannot quite bring the goal into focus. So you walk, and as you walk, the forest changes around you, the trees becoming larger or smaller, the spacing between them widening or narrowing, the light shifting from green to blue to amber. And you accept all of this without question, without surprise, because in the dream state, continuity is not required, consistency is not expected, and the impossible is simply part of the landscape. And then the forest opens into a clearing, and in the center of the clearing, there is a pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting the sky above, though you still cannot see the sky directly, cannot find the edge of the canopy that must be up there somewhere. You approach the pool, and as you get closer, you realize that what you thought was a reflection is something else, that the pool contains not the sky above, but another sky, a different configuration of stars, a different pattern of constellations that you do not recognize, but that feel familiar nonetheless, as if you had seen them long ago, in some other life, some other existence that you have forgotten, but that still echoes in the deep structures of memory. You kneel at the edge of the pool, and the water is so clear, so perfectly transparent, that you cannot tell where the surface is, cannot distinguish between the water and the air above it. And when you look into the pool, you see not your own reflection, but the face of someone else, someone you almost recognize, someone who might be you in some parallel version of reality, some alternate timeline where different choices were made, different paths taken. This other self looks back at you with an expression of infinite sadness and infinite compassion, and you understand, though no words are spoken, that this is showing you something about the nature of identity, about the contingency of the self you think of as you, about the many possible versions of yourself that exist in potential, in the vast probability space of might have been and could still be. And then the dream shifts, as dreams do, without transition, without explanation. Now you are in a city, but it is a city unlike any you have seen. The buildings are tall, impossibly tall, rising into clouds or mist, their upper stories invisible from the street level. The architecture is strange, combining elements from different periods and cultures in ways that should not work, but somehow do, creating structures that are both ancient and futuristic, both familiar and utterly alien. The streets are empty, or nearly so. Occasionally you see figures in the distance, but they are always too far away to make out clearly, always vanishing around corners or into doorways before you can approach them. You are searching for something here too, though again you cannot quite remember what. A building perhaps, a particular address, a person you need to meet. The search itself seems more important than the goal, and you wander through the empty streets, through plazas and alleyways, across bridges that span chasms whose bottoms you cannot see, through gardens where enormous flowers bloom in colors that have no names, flowers that give off a perfume so intense it is almost a sound, a vibration that you feel in your chest, in your bones. And as you wander, you begin to notice that the city is changing, that it is not static, but is somehow alive, somehow responsive to your presence. Buildings shift their positions when you are not looking directly at them. Streets curve away in new directions. The light changes, becoming brighter or dimmer, warmer or cooler, creating different moods, different atmospheres. And you realize that this city is not external to you, not a place you are visiting, but a place you are creating, that it is emerging from your own mind, taking shape according to some deep logic you do not consciously understand, but that guides the dream nonetheless, that shapes its contents and determines its flow. The voice returns, weaving itself back into your dream, awareness, speaking of the nature of dreams and consciousness, of the way the mind creates reality, whether in sleep or waking. The waking world, it says, is also in some sense constructed by your mind, is also a creation of neural processing, of the brain's interpretation of sensory signals. You do not perceive the world directly, do not have immediate access to external reality. Instead, your brain receives patterns of electrochemical activity from your sense organs, patterns of light hitting the retina, patterns of air pressure variations in the ear, patterns of chemical concentrations detected by the nose and tongue, patterns of mechanical deformation detected by touch receptors in the skin. And from these patterns, from these raw data streams, it constructs a model, an internal simulation of what is probably out there in the world. This model, this internal simulation, is what you actually experience, what you perceive as the world. And the brain is remarkably good at creating this model, at making it so coherent and consistent and apparently objective that you normally never doubt its veridicality, never question whether what you are perceiving corresponds to what is actually there. But the model is not perfect, is not a complete or fully accurate representation. It is a useful fiction, a pragmatic approximation that captures the information most relevant to survival and functioning, while leaving out vast amounts of detail, while filling in gaps with assumptions and expectations, while imposing structure and meaning that may not exist in the raw sensory data. Visual illusions demonstrate this clearly. When you see an optical illusion, when you perceive something that you know intellectually cannot be right, when parallel lines appear to converge, when static images appear to move, when colors seem different depending on their surroundings, you are seeing the constructive nature of perception, the way your brain is actively interpreting and making sense of sensory input rather than passively recording it. And what is true of simple visual illusions is true more generally of all perception. Your experience of the world is always mediated by your brain's interpretive processes, always shaped by expectations and assumptions, always influenced by attention and motivation and emotion. In dreams, the same processes are at work, but without the constraint of sensory input, without the corrective feedback that external reality provides during waking consciousness. The brain's reality generation machinery runs freely, creating experiences based on memory and imagination, on current concerns and random neural activity, unconstrained by the need to accurately represent an external world. This is why dreams can be so strange, so unlike waking experience, but also why they can feel so real while you are in them. The same systems that generate your experience of the waking world are generating your experience of the dream world. And from them, inside, from the perspective of the experiencing subject, they are equally real, equally present, equally convincing. You drift through more dreams, or perhaps through different phases of the same dream, through landscapes that morph and flow, through encounters with people who are composites of multiple individuals, who have the face of one person you know, and the voice of another, and the mannerisms of a third, through situations that are simultaneously mundane and impossible, familiar and strange. Time in the dream has become even more fluid, has lost whatever structure it retained before. Events do not follow in logical sequence. Cause and effect are scrambled. You might experience the consequence before the cause, might find yourself in the middle of a story without any beginning, might arrive at conclusions without having gone through any reasoning process to reach them. And through all of this, there is an emotional tone, a feeling that colors the entire experience, that gives it coherence even when its content is fragmented and illogical. This feeling might be nostalgia, a bittersweet longing for something lost or never had. Or it might be a sense of quest, of being on a journey towards some important destination that remains always just out of reach. Or it might be peaceful contentment, a feeling that everything is as it should be, that you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to do, even if what you are doing makes no logical sense. The emotional content of dreams is often more memorable and more significant than their narrative content. You might wake up having forgotten the specific events of a dream, but still carrying its emotional tone, still feeling happy or sad or anxious or peaceful in response to experiences you cannot quite remember. This is because emotion and memory are deeply intertwined, because the amygdala and other emotional centers of the brain are active during REM sleep, processing feelings and associations, integrating emotional experiences, working through unresolved tensions and conflicts in the symbolic language of dreams. And now the voice speaks of something else, something that lies even deeper than dreams, a level of consciousness that is reached in the deepest phases of meditation or in certain rare moments of spontaneous insight, a state that has been described by mystics and contemplatives across many traditions, a direct apprehension of being itself, of existence, without the usual overlay of concepts and interpretations, without the constant stream of thoughts that normally fills awareness. This state has many names: pure consciousness, witnessing awareness, the clear light, the void, the ground of being. But names are inadequate, because language is built for describing objects and events and relationships, and this state is prior to all of that, is more fundamental than any particular content of consciousness. In this state, if it can be called a state, there is awareness, but not awareness of anything in particular. There is presence, but not the presence of a distinct self observing a distinct world. Subject and object have not yet separated. There is simply the bare fact of experiencing, of being, without elaboration, without commentary, without the story that usually runs constantly in the background of waking consciousness. The story that says, I am a person with a name and a history in a particular place at a particular time, having particular experiences and moving toward particular goals. This pure awareness, this consciousness without content, is perhaps what remains when all the accumulated structures of self and world dissolve, when the boundaries that define individual existence become transparent, when you recognize that the sense of being a separate entity, fundamentally isolated from everything else, is itself a construction, a useful fiction maintained by the brain for pragmatic purposes, but not ultimately true, not finally real. What remains is not nothing, not the absence of experience, but something prior to the division between something and nothing, prior to the categories and concepts that organize experience into familiar patterns. Mystical traditions speak of this realization as liberating, as the end of suffering, because suffering depends on the sense of separation, on the feeling that there is a self that can be threatened, that can fail, that can be harmed or diminished. When that sense of separation dissolves, when the boundaries become transparent, what remains is a peace beyond understanding, a joy that does not depend on circumstances, a love without object that simply is, that radiates without source or target, that fills everything because it is not located in any particular place, but is the nature of being itself. This might sound abstract, philosophical, irrelevant to the practical matter of falling asleep, but the voice suggests that there is a connection, that deep sleep and mystical awareness are not as different as they might seem, that both involve a letting go of the ordinary structures of consciousness, a release from the constant activity of self-maintenance, a surrender to something larger and more fundamental than the individual ego. In both, there is a kind of death, not a literal death, but a temporary death of the self as a distinct entity. And in both, there is a peace that comes from this dissolution, from this return to something simpler, something more basic, something that was there before you became you and that will remain after you cease to be. You are very deep now, in the darkest hours of the night, in the phases of sleep where consciousness is most attenuated, where the sense of being an individual entity becomes most tenuous. The dreams have faded, or have become so abstract, so minimal, that they are more like pure feelings or sensations than like narrative experiences. You might be aware, dimly, of your body lying in bed, of the weight of blankets, of the softness of pillow. But this awareness is distant, peripheral, unimportant. The body maintains itself, breathing and circulating blood and regulating temperature, all without any need for conscious attention, all according to programs that have been running since before you were born, that were refined over millions of years of evolution, that know what to do without being told. And in this deep rest, in this profound stillness, there is healing. The body is repairing itself, cells are dividing and differentiating, wounds are closing, immune cells are patrolling for pathogens and damaged tissue. Proteins are being synthesized and broken down. Energy stores are being replenished. The brain is consolidating memories, pruning unnecessary synapses, strengthening important connections, clearing away metabolic waste, preparing itself for the next day's demands. Growth hormone is being released, stimulating tissue repair and muscle development. Stress hormones that were elevated during the day are dropping to baseline levels, allowing systems that were mobilized for action to stand down, to rest, to recover. Sleep is not just the absence of waking, but an active, essential state with its own functions, its own processes, its own work to do. Without adequate sleep, none of these processes can operate optimally, and over time, chronic sleep deprivation leads to a cascade of health problems: impaired immune function, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, cognitive decline, emotional instability, accelerated aging. The body and brain need sleep the way they need food and water, need it for maintenance and repair, for integration and consolidation, for simply keeping the complex system of self functioning properly. The voice speaks now of cycles, of rhythms, of the way living systems organize themselves in time, creating patterns of activity and rest, of waking and sleeping that align with the larger patterns of the cosmos, with the rotation of the Earth and its orbit around the Sun, with the cycles of day and night, of seasons and years. These biological rhythms, these circadian and ultradian patterns, are not imposed from outside, but arise from within, generated by networks of genes and proteins that oscillate with regular periods, creating molecular clocks that keep time, even in the absence of external cues. The master circadian clock in mammals is located in a small region of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a cluster of about 20,000 neurons that maintains a roughly 24-hour rhythm of activity, firing more during subjective day and less during subjective night. This rhythm is generated by interlocking feedback loops of gene expression, where certain genes promote their own transcription and translation, while simultaneously promoting the transcription and translation of other genes that inhibit them, creating an oscillation that takes about 24 hours to complete one cycle. This master clock is synchronized to the external day-night cycle by light, specifically by light detected by specialized photoreceptive cells in the retina that sends signals directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, adjusting its phase to match the solar day. From the suprachiasmatic nucleus, timing signals are sent throughout the brain and body, coordinating the activity of peripheral clocks in virtually every tissue and organ, ensuring that different physiological processes happen at appropriate times, that the body's internal temporal organization matches the external temporal environment. When this alignment is disrupted, by shift work, by jet lag, by staying up late with artificial light, the result is not just sleepiness, but a deeper disorganization, a desynchronization between internal rhythms and external reality, and between different internal rhythms themselves. Different organs and tissues, normally coordinated by the master clock, can drift out of phase with each other, creating conflicts and inefficiencies, like an orchestra where different sections are playing at different tempos. This circadian disruption has been linked to numerous health problems, from metabolic disorders to mood disorders to increased cancer risk, highlighting how deeply dependent our biology is on proper temporal organization, on maintaining the right rhythms, on aligning internal time with cosmic time. You are part of these cosmic rhythms, these planetary cycles of light and dark, of day and night. Your body knows this, responds to this, even when your conscious mind is not aware of it. You are not separate from nature, but are a part of it, an expression of it, a temporary local organization of matter and energy that participates in the great rhythms that govern all life on Earth. The sleep you are experiencing now is not just your personal rest, but is your participation in these larger cycles, your alignment with patterns that are far older and far larger than any individual organism. The night is passing. Hours are slipping by, though you are not aware of them, not counting them, not concerned with their passage. The Earth continues its rotation, carrying your location away from the sun and then, gradually, inevitably, back toward it again. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, constellations tracing their paths across the sky, though you cannot see them, though your awareness is turned inward, immersed in the internal cosmos of sleep and dream. The moon, if it is visible tonight, continues its own cycle, waxing or waning according to its position relative to Earth and Sun, creating tides in the oceans, subtle pulls on the water molecules in your own body, reminding everything that contains liquid that it is connected to everything else through the invisible forces of gravity. And in the deep structures of your sleeping brain, in the networks of neurons that remain active even in the deepest phases of sleep, patterns are forming and dissolving, memories are being processed and integrated, and experiences are being woven into the larger narrative of self. The day just passed, with all its perceptions and interactions, with all its moments of attention and distraction, is being evaluated, sorted, some parts marked for retention, for incorporation into long-term memory, other parts allowed to fade, to be forgotten, to return to the general background from which they emerged. This process of memory consolidation is one of sleep's most important functions. During waking, experiences are encoded in short-term memory systems, in temporary holding areas where they remain accessible but not yet stable, not yet integrated into the permanent record. Sleep, particularly deep, slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, is when these temporary memories are transferred to long-term storage, when they are linked to existing knowledge structures, when they are given meaning and context by being connected to what is already known. But this is not a simple copying process, not a straightforward transfer of information from one storage system to another. The brain does not work like a computer, saving files from RAM to hard disk. Instead, memory consolidation is reconstructive and selective. Not everything experienced during the day is preserved. The brain chooses, according to criteria we do not fully understand, which experiences are significant enough to remember, which ones carry sufficient emotional weight or practical importance or novelty to merit long-term storage. And in the process of transferring these selected memories to long-term storage, they are modified, are integrated with existing memories, are given narrative structure, are interpreted in light of current goals and beliefs. This means that your memories are not fixed recordings of past events, but are living, changing entities that evolve over time, that are different each time you recall them, that are influenced by your current state and perspective. The past, as you remember it, is not a stable, objective reality, but is a story you tell yourself, a story that changes as you change, that is rewritten continuously in light of new experiences and new understanding. This might seem like a flaw, like an imperfection in the memory system, but it is actually adaptive, actually useful, because it allows you to extract general principles from specific experiences, to identify patterns across different situations, to learn lessons that can be applied flexibly, rather than being rigidly tied to particular contexts. The voice continues its patient exposition, its gentle guidance through the territories of sleep and consciousness, speaking now of the paradox of identity, of the way you remain yourself despite constant change, despite the fact that the matter you are made of is constantly being replaced, despite the fact that your memories are constantly being modified and rewritten, despite the fact that your beliefs and desires and personality traits evolve over time in response to experience. What is the thread of continuity that makes you, you? What persists through all this change? Perhaps, the voice suggests, identity is not a thing, but a process, not a substance, but a pattern. And what persists is not a particular configuration of matter, or even a particular set of memories or beliefs, but rather a certain style, a certain way of organizing experience, a certain tendency to respond to situations in characteristic ways. You are a pattern that perpetuates itself, that maintains its distinctive shape, even as its substrate changes, like a whirlpool in a river, which maintains its form even though the water molecules that constitute it at any given moment are constantly flowing through and being replaced by new ones. The whirlpool is not made of particular water molecules, but is a stable pattern in the flow of water, a self-organizing structure that persists as long as the conditions that sustain it remain. Similarly, you are a self-organizing pattern, a structure in the flow of matter and energy and information that maintains itself through time by constantly rebuilding itself, by continuously processing new inputs and adjusting internal states to maintain coherence and functionality. The sense of being a continuous self, of being the same person you were yesterday and will be tomorrow, is not an illusion, but it is also not grounded in any unchanging substance. It is grounded in continuity of pattern, in the fact that today's you is built from yesterday's you, is causally connected to it, inherits its memories and dispositions and trajectories, and will, in turn, serve as the foundation for tomorrow's you. This understanding can be liberating in its own way. If you are not a fixed entity, but a process, then change is not a threat to your identity, but is part of what you are. You can grow and evolve, can let go of outdated beliefs and habits, can become different while remaining yourself. Because what makes you you is not adherence to some fixed template, but the continuity of the pattern, the coherence of the process. You are a verb, not a noun. You are not a being, but a becoming, a constant unfolding, a movement through time that creates its own trajectory as it goes. And in sleep, in this deep rest you are experiencing now, even this process self, this verb self, becomes quieter, becomes less active, releases some of its constant work of self-maintenance and self-definition. The boundaries become more permeable. The distinction between self and not self becomes less sharp. You are returning temporarily to a state that is simpler, more undifferentiated, closer to the original condition from which the sense of self emerged in infancy and early childhood. A newborn infant does not yet have a clear sense of being a separate entity. The distinction between self and world develops gradually over the first months and years of life, as the child learns through experience that some things are controllable, movements of their own body, for instance, while other things are not, that some sensations come from within, while others come from without. The sense of self is constructed, is learned, is something that emerges from the interaction between an organism and its environment, rather than being present from the beginning as a given. And in deep sleep, some of that constructed self dissolves again, not completely, not irreversibly, but enough that when you wake, you have to remember who you are, have to reconstruct your sense of identity and location and context. Those first moments of waking are a transition, a re-emergence, a return to the self you inhabit during waking hours. And sometimes, in those first moments, there is a flicker of something else, a memory of the deeper state you were in, a state where the usual structures of self were absent or attenuated, where consciousness existed without its ordinary contents, where awareness was present but had not yet organized itself into the familiar pattern of I thinking about the world. The night continues, deep and silent and restorative. The voice continues too, though its words are becoming softer, more diffuse, blending into the general atmosphere of the sleep space, becoming less like distinct communications and more like the texture of the darkness itself, like the quality of the silence. It speaks of many things, of science and philosophy, of cosmology and neuroscience, of the evolution of life and the nature of time. But all of these topics are woven together into a single, continuous meditation on the mystery of existence, on the improbable miracle of consciousness, on the beauty and strangeness of being a temporary organization of matter that has become capable of wondering about itself. It speaks of entropy, that fundamental principle of thermodynamics that says that closed systems evolve toward disorder, toward maximum entropy, toward a state where energy is evenly distributed and no gradients remain to drive change. And yet, locally, temporarily, in small pockets of the universe like the Earth, entropy can decrease, order can increase, structure can become more complex, because Earth is not a closed system, but is constantly receiving energy from the sun. And this flow of energy allows local reversals of the global trend toward disorder. Life is a local reversal of entropy, a temporary island of increasing complexity in a universe that is overall moving toward uniformity and heat death. Every living thing, including you, is maintaining itself against the constant pressure of entropy, is using energy to build and maintain the intricate structures required for life, is fighting a temporary and ultimately doomed battle against the second law of thermodynamics. But temporary does not mean meaningless. The fact that all structure is ultimately temporary, that all order will eventually dissolve, does not diminish the beauty and significance of the patterns that briefly arise. A wave on the ocean exists for only moments before it collapses back into the sea. But while it exists, it is real. It has form and movement and power. You too are a wave, a temporary pattern in the flow of matter and energy, and your brief existence is no less real, no less significant for being temporary. The voice speaks of connection, of the way everything in the universe is linked to everything else through intricate networks of causation, through the forces that operate across space, through the shared history that binds all matter together in a common story. The atoms in your body have been part of countless other structures, stars and planets, oceans and atmospheres, plants and animals, other human bodies. And they will be part of countless more after you are gone. You are borrowing these atoms for a time, arranging them into the particular pattern that is you, but they do not belong to you in any permanent sense. They are participants in a much larger cycle, a cosmic circulation of matter that has been running since the beginning and will continue until the end, if there is an end. And the same is true of the energy that powers your life, that keeps your body warm, that drives the chemical reactions of metabolism, that sustains the electrical activity of your brain. This energy came ultimately from the sun, from the nuclear fusion reactions in its core, where hydrogen is converted to helium, releasing photons that travel 8 minutes across empty space to reach the Earth, where they are captured by plants and converted through photosynthesis into chemical energy stored in sugar molecules, which are then consumed by you, broken down in your cells, used to synthesize ATP, the universal energy currency of life, which powers everything from muscle contraction to protein synthesis to the firing of neurons. You are solar powered in the most literal sense, a temporary concentration of sunlight, a local eddy in the great flow of energy from the sun through the Earth's biosphere and back out into space as waste heat. The warmth you feel in your body right now, lying in the darkness, breathing slowly, heart beating steadily, that warmth is ancient starlight transformed. Photons from the sun converted through multiple stages of biological chemistry into the kinetic energy of molecules in motion, into the heat that maintains your body temperature at the precise level required for life. And when you die, when the pattern that is you finally dissolves, that energy will not disappear, cannot disappear, because energy is conserved, because it can change forms but cannot be created or destroyed. It will simply disperse, will spread out into the environment, will be absorbed by the air and soil, will eventually become part of other systems, other organisms, other temporary organizations of matter and energy. Nothing is ever truly lost. Everything is always only transformed, shifted from one state to another, from one configuration to another, in an endless dance of change that has no beginning and no end, or that has a beginning so far in the past and an end so far in the future that they are effectively infinite from any human perspective. The voice speaks of love, though it does not use that word exactly, speaks instead of the fundamental tendency of things toward relationship, toward connection, toward the formation of bonds. At the most basic level, this is just physics. Atoms bond with other atoms because certain configurations are more stable, lower in energy, than isolated particles. Electrons are shared between nuclei, creating molecular structures that are stronger and more stable than the individual atoms would be alone. This is chemistry, the science of how different kinds of matter interact and combine. But it is also, in a sense, a kind of primitive love, a reaching out, a desire for connection, a tendency toward union rather than isolation. And as structures become more complex, as you move from simple molecules to complex organic compounds, to cells, to organisms, to communities, this fundamental tendency toward connection takes on new forms, becomes more elaborate, more subtle, more rich with meaning. Cells communicate with each other through chemical signals, coordinating their activities, forming tissues and organs that work together in harmonious cooperation. Organisms form social bonds, recognize and prefer certain individuals, experience what we call emotions, feelings that motivate behavior, that draw them towards some things and away from others, that create the complex web of relationships that constitutes a social group, a community, an ecosystem. And in humans, with our elaborated brains and our capacity for language and abstraction and imagination, This tendency toward connection becomes something even more complex, becomes culture and art and philosophy, becomes the vast network of meanings and symbols and stories that we create together, becomes the experience of recognizing yourself in another person, of feeling what they feel, of caring about their well-being as if it were your own. Love, in this expansive sense, is not just a personal emotion, but is a manifestation of a universal principle, the same principle that causes atoms to bond and cells to cooperate and organisms to form societies, scaled up to the level of human consciousness and given new dimensions of depth and significance. You are capable of love because you are a continuation of that universal tendency toward connection, that fundamental pattern that runs through all of nature, from the quantum level to the cosmic scale. When you love someone, when you care about something beyond yourself, you are not acting against your nature, but are expressing it most fully, are manifesting the deep truth that separation is an illusion, that everything is connected, that the boundaries we draw between self and other are useful fictions, but not ultimate realities. In sleep, in this deep rest you are experiencing now, those boundaries soften even further. The constant work of maintaining the distinction between self and world, between what is me and what is not me, relaxes. The psychological defenses that keep certain thoughts and feelings at bay during waking consciousness become more permeable. The rigid categories that organize experience into familiar patterns become more fluid. And in this softened, more fluid state, there is an opportunity for healing, for integration, for allowing parts of yourself that are usually kept separate to communicate with each other, to find new arrangements, new harmonies. The voice speaks of the body as a community, a vast ecosystem of trillions of cells, each one a living entity with its own functions and its own tiny perspective, all cooperating to create the larger organism that is you. Your body is not a single thing, but a collection, a society, a civilization of microscopic beings that have somehow learned to work together with such perfect coordination that they create the illusion of unity, the experience of being a single, integrated self. Each cell in your body contains the same DNA, the same genetic information, but different cells read different parts of that information, express different genes, and thereby take on different roles, different functions. A neuron and a muscle cell and a skin cell all have the same genome, but they are radically different in structure and function because they are using different subsets of their genetic instructions, are running different programs from the same library of code. This is what makes complex, multicellular life possible. The ability of cells to specialize, to differentiate, to become different from each other while remaining part of a coordinated whole. And these specialized cells are arranged into tissues, tissues into organs, organs into systems. The circulatory system, the nervous system, the digestive system, the immune system, each with its own functions, its own patterns of activity, its own ways of contributing to the overall functioning of the organism. And all of these systems are constantly communicating with each other, constantly exchanging information through hormones and neurotransmitters and other chemical signals, constantly adjusting their activities to maintain the delicate balance that is health, that is homeostasis, that is the stable dynamic equilibrium that allows a living system to persist through time despite the constant changes in its environment. Right now, as you lie here in the darkness, all of these systems are operating, are doing their work without any need for conscious direction. Your heart is beating, your lungs are breathing, your kidneys are filtering blood, your liver is processing molecules, your immune system is patrolling for threats, your digestive system is breaking down whatever food remains from your last meal, your endocrine system is releasing hormones in carefully timed pulses, Your nervous system is maintaining the slow rhythms of sleep while also monitoring the environment for potential dangers, ready to wake you if necessary, but otherwise allowing you to rest, to recover, to heal. The complexity of this orchestration is staggering, beyond any human comprehension in its full detail. The fact that it works at all, that all these trillions of cells and thousands of chemical reactions and dozens of organs and systems manage to coordinate their activities with sufficient precision to keep you alive, to keep you functioning, to allow you to have experiences and thoughts and feelings, is perhaps the deepest mystery of biology, deeper even than the origin of life itself, because at least the origin of life is a question about how chemistry became capable of replication and evolution, while the functioning of a complex organism like a human is a question about how coordination and cooperation can be achieved at such massive scale, with such precision, with such reliability. And yet it happens, effortlessly, automatically, every moment of your life, from conception to death. Your conscious mind is not aware of most of this activity, does not know what your liver is doing, or how your immune system identifies and eliminates pathogens, or what signals your endocrine system is sending. All of this happens below the threshold of awareness, in the vast unconscious realm of automatic bodily processes that have been refined over hundreds of millions of years of evolution, that have been tested and improved through countless generations, through the harsh filter of natural selection that eliminates anything that does not work well enough to allow reproduction. You are the beneficiary of this long evolutionary history, inheriting systems and processes that your ancestors developed slowly, painfully, through trial and error and death and occasional success. Everything in your body that works because it has been tested extensively, because organisms that had versions of these systems that did not work as well left fewer offspring, while organisms that had slightly better versions left slightly more. And over enough generations, over enough time, these small differences accumulate, and systems become more refined, more sophisticated, more reliable. The voice speaks of evolution as a kind of learning process, a way that life explores the space of possible designs, trying out different variations, keeping what works, discarding what does not. But it is a strange kind of learning, because there is no teacher, no designer, no conscious intelligence guiding the process. Evolution is blind, is purely mechanical, is simply the inevitable result of reproduction with variation in a context of limited resources. And yet, from this blind mechanism emerges the appearance of design, the illusion of purpose, structures so intricate and well adapted to their functions that they seem as if they must have been created by an intelligent mind. The eye, for instance, with its cornea and lens, and retina, with its muscles that adjust focus and control pupil size, with its photoreceptor cells that convert light into electrical signals, and its intricate neural processing that begins even in the retina itself, extracting edges and detecting motion and adjusting for changes in overall illumination. The eye seems too complex, too well designed to have arisen by chance. And yet it did, step by step, through countless small modifications, each one providing some small advantage, each one making organisms slightly more able to detect light, to form images, to see the world with increasing clarity and detail. And the same is true of every other complex adaptation: wings and echolocation, photosynthesis and bioluminescence, the immune system and the brain. All arose through this same process of blind variation and selective retention, of trying random modifications and keeping the ones that work. The apparent design, the appearance of purpose, is an illusion, or rather is a pattern that emerges from the evolutionary process without being intended by it, just as the pattern of a snowflake emerges from the simple physical laws that govern how water molecules bond to each other in cold conditions, without any designer planning that particular intricate, symmetrical structure. You are a product of evolution, a descendant of an unbroken line of organisms that stretches back billions of years to the very origin of life on Earth. Every one of your ancestors, without exception, was successful enough to reproduce, to pass on their genes to the next generation. Everyone who came before you in your direct lineage survived long enough to have children, avoided all the countless hazards that could have ended their line, predation and disease and starvation and accident, and all the other ways that organisms can die before reproducing. You are the winner of a lottery that has been running for billions of years, the inheritor of a legacy of survival and adaptation and successful reproduction that extends back to the very beginning of life. This is true of every living thing, every organism on Earth. Every bacterium, every plant, every animal is the product of the same unbroken lineage, the same deep history, the same long story of survival and reproduction. All life on Earth is related, shares common ancestors, branches from the same tree. You are quite literally kin to everything that lives, cousin to the trees and the grass, distant relative to bacteria and archaea, sibling to chimpanzees and bonobos, fellow mammal to whales and bats and elephants. The differences between species, the variations in form and function and behavior, are real and significant, but they are differences within a family, variations on a theme, elaborations of basic patterns that are shared across all of life. The voice speaks of this common inheritance, this shared biology, with a tone of wonder and reverence. The genetic code, the system by which information is stored in DNA and translated into proteins, is essentially the same in all organisms, from bacteria to humans. The same 4 nucleotides, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, arranged in different sequences, code for the same 20 amino acids, which fold into proteins that perform the work of the cell. The basic machinery of life, the ribosomes that synthesize proteins, the enzymes that copy DNA, the molecular motors that move molecules around inside cells. All of these are fundamentally similar across all domains of life, suggesting that they were present in the common ancestor of all living things, in that first successful replicator from which everything else descended. This unity of life, this fundamental similarity beneath the spectacular diversity of forms, is one of the most profound discoveries of modern biology, one of the strongest pieces of evidence for the theory of evolution, because it is exactly what you would expect if all life descended from a common ancestor, and it is difficult to explain in any other way. Why would all organisms use the same genetic code, the same basic biochemistry, the same molecular machinery, unless they inherited these systems from a common source? And within this shared biological framework, within this common inheritance, there is immense creativity, immense variation, immense exploration of possibilities. Evolution has produced organisms adapted to every conceivable environment on Earth: hot springs and frozen tundra, deep ocean vents and high mountaintops, acidic lakes and radioactive waste. It has produced bodies of every shape and size, from microscopic bacteria to blue whales, from insects to elephants. It has produced behaviors of stunning complexity: the navigation of migratory birds, the communication of dolphins, the tool use of crows, the social structures of ants and bees, the language and culture of humans. All of this diversity, all of this richness, has emerged from the simple process of reproduction, with variation and selective retention, operating over billions of years, exploring the space of possible designs without plan or purpose, simply trying things and keeping what works. The creativity of evolution is not the creativity of an artist or engineer, choosing among options according to some vision of what should be, but rather the creativity of exhaustive search, of trying everything, of allowing the environment itself to determine what survives and what does not. You are drifting deeper now, or perhaps you have been at maximum depth for some time and are now beginning the slow ascent back toward lighter sleep and eventual waking. The cycles of sleep continue, the alternation between deep, slow-wave sleep and lighter stages, between non-REM and REM, between dreamless darkness and the strange theatre of dreams. The night is advancing, the hours are passing, and your body is accomplishing the work of restoration and consolidation, of repair and renewal that sleep enables. The voice speaks now of the morning that will come, of the return to waking consciousness, of the re-emergence of the self from the depths of sleep. This return is not instantaneous, not a sharp transition from one state to another, but rather a gradual process, a slow brightening, a progressive reactivation of the systems that create waking awareness. The ascending arousal systems in the brainstem begin to increase their activity, sending signals throughout the brain that shift neural networks into the patterns characteristic of waking consciousness. The thalamus opens its gates, allowing sensory information to flow once again from the sense organs to the cortex. The prefrontal cortex, which has been relatively quiet during sleep, resumes its role as the executive control center, the part of the brain that plans and decides and inhibits impulses and maintains the coherent sense of self that characterizes waking life. And with these neural changes comes the return of awareness, the reconstruction of the subjective perspective, the re-establishment of the feeling of being a particular person in a particular place at a particular time. You will remember who you are, where you are, what day it is, what you need to do. The concerns and responsibilities of waking life will reassert themselves. The sense of being a separate individual entity with your own thoughts and feelings and goals will return in full force. The boundaries that dissolved in sleep will re-establish themselves. The self that loosened and diffused will coalesce again into its familiar form. But something will have changed, perhaps subtly, perhaps in ways you cannot articulate or even consciously notice. The night's journey will have left its mark, will have done its work of integration and healing, of processing and consolidation. Memories will have been strengthened or allowed to fade. Emotional experiences will have been metabolized, their intensity reduced, their meanings integrated into the larger narrative of self. Problems that seemed intractable the night before may appear less daunting, may be seen from new perspectives, may reveal possible solutions that were not visible in the tired mind of evening. There is wisdom in the old advice to sleep on it, to postpone important decisions until morning, to allow the night's rest to clarify thinking and settle emotions. The sleeping brain continues to work on problems, continues to process information, and sometimes arrives at insights that the waking mind, with its more focused but also more rigid patterns of thought, cannot reach. Many of the greatest scientific and artistic breakthroughs have reportedly come after periods of sleep, solutions appearing in dreams or in the first moments of waking, as if the sleeping mind had been working on the problem all along, approaching it from angles that the waking mind would not have considered. The voice speaks of the value of rest, of the necessity of allowing periods of inactivity, of not pushing constantly toward achievement and productivity, but instead honoring the natural rhythms of activity and rest, of waking and sleeping, of effort and recovery. Modern culture, particularly in industrialized societies, tends to devalue rest, to see it as wasted time, as unproductive, as something to be minimized in favor of constant activity and achievement. Sleep is often sacrificed for work or entertainment, is cut short to squeeze more hours out of the day, is treated as an inconvenient biological necessity rather than as a valuable state in its own right. But this attitude is misguided, is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how biological systems work, how they maintain themselves, how they sustain optimal functioning over time. You cannot push constantly without recovery. You cannot be always active without periods of rest. The systems that enable high performance, whether physical or cognitive or emotional, require downtime to repair and replenish themselves. Deprive them of that downtime and performance degrades, health suffers. The very goals that motivated sacrificing sleep become more difficult to achieve. Athletes understand this. The best training programs include rest days, recovery periods when the body is allowed to repair the microdamage caused by intense exercise, when energy stores are replenished, when adaptations occur that make the body stronger and more capable. Training without adequate recovery leads not to improvement, but to overtraining syndrome, to decreased performance, to increased injury risk, to burnout. The rest is not optional, is not a luxury, but is an essential component of the training itself, the period during which the actual improvements occur. The same principle applies to cognitive work, to creative endeavor, to emotional processing. The brain needs downtime, needs periods of reduced activity, needs sleep and rest and mind-wandering and unfocused attention. These states are not wasted time, but are when consolidation happens, when insights emerge, when the unconscious mind can work on problems without interference from the conscious executive functions. The constant stimulation of modern life, the endless stream of information and entertainment and demands on attention, makes it difficult to find these periods of genuine rest, of quiet, of allowing the mind to settle and be still. Sleep is the ultimate form of this rest, the deepest and most complete withdrawal from the demands of waking life, the state in which recovery and restoration are most thorough and most necessary. To honor sleep, to prioritize it, to protect it from the encroachments of work and worry and artificial light, is to honor the body's needs, to respect the biological reality of being a living organism that requires rest to function optimally. It is not weakness to need sleep. It is not laziness to prioritize rest. It is recognition of the fundamental requirements of the living system that you are, the acknowledgement that you are not a machine that can run continuously, but rather an organism that participates in natural rhythms, that needs both activity and rest, both waking and sleeping, both engagement with the world and withdrawal into the interior spaces of recovery and renewal. The voice continues its soft meditation on the nature of rest and sleep and consciousness, speaking now of the different forms that rest can take, the various states between full waking alertness and deep sleep, the spectrum of consciousness that extends from focused attention, through relaxed awareness, through drowsiness, through light sleep, through deep sleep, with many gradations and variations along the way. Each of these states has its own characteristics, its own patterns of brain activity, its own subjective qualities, its own functions and values. Meditation, for instance, is a state of rest that is not sleep, but that shares some qualities with sleep, particularly in its more advanced forms. In meditation, there is a deliberate letting go of the constant mental activity that characterizes ordinary waking consciousness, a stepping back from the stream of thoughts and concerns, an allowing of the mind to settle into stillness. This is not the same as sleep, because there is still awareness, still some degree of alertness, but it is also not ordinary waking, because the mind is not engaged with tasks or problems or plans, is not actively processing information or making decisions. Different meditation traditions approach this state in different ways, use different techniques to help the mind settle, to reduce the constant activity of thinking and worrying and planning. Some focus on the breath, using the simple rhythm of inhalation and exhalation as an anchor for attention, a point to return to whenever the mind wanders. Some use mantras, repeated sounds or phrases that occupy the verbal mind and prevent it from spinning off into its usual patterns of thought. Some use visualization, creating mental images of peaceful scenes or symbolic forms. Some use body awareness, scanning through the body and noting sensations without judging them. Some use open monitoring, simply observing whatever arises in consciousness without grasping or rejecting, allowing thoughts and feelings to come and go like clouds passing through the sky. All of these techniques are ways of interrupting the usual patterns, of creating gaps in the constant stream of mental activity, of allowing the possibility of a different relationship to experience, one that is less reactive, less identified with thoughts and emotions, more spacious and accepting. And with practice, with regular engagement with these techniques, the mind becomes more capable of settling, becomes more familiar with states of rest and stillness, becomes less dominated by compulsive thinking, and more able to choose what to attend to, what to engage with, what to let pass by. The benefits of regular meditation practice have been documented in numerous scientific studies showing changes in brain structure and function, improvements in attention and emotion regulation, reductions in stress and anxiety, enhancements in well-being and life satisfaction. These are not merely subjective reports, but objective measurements. Brain scans showing increased grey matter density in regions associated with attention and emotional regulation, decreased activity in regions associated with self-referential thinking and mind-wandering, changes in the balance of neurotransmitters that affect mood and stress response. What meditation reveals, what becomes apparent through regular practice, is that the mind has considerable plasticity, considerable capacity to change, to develop new patterns, to learn new modes of functioning. The ordinary state of consciousness that most people experience most of the time is not the only possibility, not a fixed given, but is itself a habit, a pattern that has been reinforced through repetition, but that can be modified, can be trained, can be gradually shifted towards states that are more peaceful, more clear, more conducive to well-being. And this training of the mind, this cultivation of different states of consciousness, is relevant to sleep, because the ability to let go, to release mental activity, to allow the mind to settle, is precisely what is needed to fall asleep easily and to sleep deeply. Insomnia, difficulty sleeping, is often caused or exacerbated by an inability to stop thinking, by a mind that continues churning, continues worrying, continues planning and reviewing and anticipating, preventing the natural transition into sleep. The techniques of meditation, the practices that help the mind settle during waking, can also be applied to the transition into sleep, can help interrupt the patterns of thought that keep the mind active when the body is ready to rest. The voice speaks of this gently, without pressure or demand, simply offering the observation that rest is a skill, that the ability to release mental activity and allow consciousness to settle can be cultivated, can be practiced, can be improved over time with patience and consistency. And this cultivation is not only useful for practical purposes, for falling asleep more easily or managing stress more effectively, but is also valuable in its own right, as an exploration of the nature of mind, as a way of discovering what consciousness is and what it can become, as a path toward deeper understanding of the self and the reality in which it is embedded. The night continues its slow passage, the earth continues its rotation, and you continue your journey through the cycles of sleep, through the alternating states, through the deep restoration and the dreaming processing and the quiet maintenance that the sleeping brain performs. The voice is becoming softer now, more distant, as if it is slowly withdrawing, slowly fading back into the silence from which it emerged. having done its work of guiding you into this deep rest, keeping you company through the long journey into the interior darkness, of providing structure and meaning and gentle companionship through the hours of sleep. But before it fades completely, it speaks once more of the morning, of the awakening that will come, of the return to the world of light and activity and engagement. This return is not something to dread, not a falling from a higher state into a lower one, but is simply the completion of the cycle, the necessary complement to sleep, the other half of the rhythm that structures life. Just as activity requires rest, rest exists in order to enable activity. Just as waking depends on sleeping, sleeping serves waking, provides the foundation for all that you do and experience when conscious. So the awakening, when it comes, should be met with gentleness, with patience, with allowance for the gradual process of returning to full consciousness. There is no need to jolt into alertness, to immediately engage with demands and obligations, to start the day with stress and rush. The transition from sleep to waking can be honored, can be given space and time, can be allowed to unfold naturally. You can lie for a few moments in that twilight state between sleeping and waking, can notice the sensations of your body, the quality of your breathing, the state of your mind. You can allow yourself to arrive fully before you begin moving, before you start thinking about what needs to be done, before you engage with the world. And when you do arise, when you do begin the day's activities, you can carry something of the night's rest with you, can maintain some quality of that deeper state, that sense of spaciousness and peace and connection to something larger than the small concerns of daily life. The boundary between sleeping and waking is not absolute, not impermeable. The states influence each other. The quality of your sleep affects the quality of your waking, and the quality of your waking affects the quality of your sleep. They are not separate, not disconnected, but are parts of a continuous whole, aspects of the larger rhythm of your life. The voice speaks now of gratitude, of appreciation for the gift of sleep, for the nightly renewal it provides, for the healing darkness that allows life to continue, that makes possible the constant activity and engagement and striving of waking existence. Sleep is not an interruption of life, but is part of what makes life possible, is as essential as food and water and air, is the foundation on which everything else rests. To be able to sleep, to surrender consciousness each night and trust that you will return, to allow yourself to become vulnerable and helpless while the body and brain do their restorative work. This is a kind of faith, a kind of trust in the fundamental benevolence of existence, in the reliability of the natural processes that maintain life. Not everyone finds sleep easily. Not everyone has the luxury of comfortable rest, of safe and quiet surroundings, of sufficient time set aside for adequate sleep. Many people struggle with insomnia, with sleep disorders, with conditions that disturb rest and prevent deep sleep from occurring. Many people work schedules that conflict with natural circadian rhythms, that require wakefulness during nighttime hours when the body and brain are programmed for sleep. Many people live in circumstances where safety is uncertain, where noise or light or other disturbances make restful sleep difficult or impossible. To have the opportunity for good sleep, to have the conditions that allow it, is a privilege, is something worthy of appreciation, is a gift that should not be taken for granted. And for those who struggle with sleep, who find it elusive or inadequate, the voice offers compassion, offers the understanding that this difficulty is real, is not a failure of will or character, is not something to be ashamed of or blamed for, but is a challenge worthy of attention, worthy of addressing with patience and care, worthy of seeking help for if needed. The science of sleep has advanced considerably in recent decades, has developed understanding of the mechanisms involved, has created diagnostic tools and treatment approaches for various sleep disorders. If sleep is persistently difficult, if insomnia or other sleep problems are interfering with health and functioning, it is worth seeking professional help, worth consulting with a sleep specialist who can assess the situation, identify potential causes, and recommend evidence-based interventions. Sleep is too important to health and well-being to ignore when it is not working well, and there is no shame in seeking help, in acknowledging that you need support in addressing this fundamental aspect of life. But for now, in this present moment, in this deep stillness of night, the focus is simply on rest, on allowing the natural processes of sleep to unfold, on trusting the body and brain to do what they have evolved to do, to repair and restore and consolidate and prepare for the coming day. The voice is nearly silent now, has merged almost completely with the general atmosphere of peaceful darkness, has become indistinguishable from the quality of the night itself, from the gentle presence that seems to surround and support you in this deep rest. The hours pass, silently, uncounted. The cycles of sleep continue their rhythm, the brain moving through its programmed sequence of states, each serving its function, each contributing to the overall work of restoration and maintenance. Dreams come and go, narratives arising and dissolving, images flickering briefly into awareness and then fading, emotions swelling and subsiding, all of it woven together into the strange tapestry of the sleeping mind's activity, meaningful and meaningless simultaneously, profound and trivial, significant and forgettable, the whole elaborate production occurring in the private theatre of your consciousness, where you are the only audience and the show runs every night without intermission or repetition. And beneath the dreams, or beyond them, or surrounding them, there is something else, something harder to name or describe, a quality of pure being, of existence without content, of awareness without objects. This is the deepest rest, the most complete peace, the state that mystics and contemplatives have pointed toward with their inadequate words and metaphors, the ground of consciousness itself, the space in which all experience arises and passes away, the constant background that is always present but usually overlooked, obscured by the constant flow of thoughts and sensations and emotions that fill the foreground of awareness. In sleep, especially in the deepest phases of slow-wave sleep, there is sometimes a glimpse of this ground state, this consciousness without content. Though glimpse is not the right word, because there is no one there to see, no subject observing an object, only the bare fact of awareness itself, existing without division, without the structure of experience, without the forms that normally shape and define conscious states. And when you wake, you will not remember this state, will not be able to describe it, will not even be certain that it occurred, because memory depends on content, depends on something happening that can be encoded and stored and later retrieved. And this state is prior to all of that, is more fundamental than the mechanisms that create memory. But even if you do not remember it consciously, even if no explicit trace remains in your waking awareness, this deep rest affects you, changes you in subtle ways, provides a kind of renewal and restoration that goes beyond the physical repair of tissues and the consolidation of memories, that touches something more fundamental, that reconnects you, however briefly and unconsciously, with the source from which consciousness emerges, the ground from which the sense of self arises, the vast silence that underlies and enables all the noise and activity of life. The ancient voice, which has been your guide and companion through this long journey into night, which has spoken of so many things, of stars and cells, of time and evolution, of dreams and consciousness, of meaning and mystery. This voice offers now a final thought, a final reflection before it withdraws completely, before it releases you to the wordless depths of sleep without narrative, without guidance, without any structure beyond the natural rhythms of the sleeping brain. You are, it says, exactly where you need to be. This moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this particular configuration of consciousness and matter, this is precisely what should be occurring. Not because there is some grand plan or divine purpose directing everything, but because this is what is occurring, and there is no other possibility, no alternative reality against which to compare this one and find it wanting. You are the universe experiencing itself, becoming aware of itself, reflecting on itself, creating meaning and beauty and understanding through the intricate process of being alive, of being conscious, of being this particular temporary organization of matter and energy that has somehow become capable of wondering about its own nature and place in the cosmos. And that is enough, more than enough. To exist, to be aware, to have this moment of consciousness, this is already everything, is already complete, lacking nothing, requiring nothing beyond what is already present. The constant seeking, the perpetual feeling that something is missing, that happiness or fulfillment or meaning lies somewhere else, in some other circumstance or achievement or state. This is the root of much suffering, much unnecessary pain. What if everything you need is already here, already present, already given, requiring only that you notice it, that you allow yourself to receive it, that you relax into the simple fact of being alive in this vast and mysterious universe? Sleep is a kind of practice in this letting go, this release of striving, this acceptance of what is. In sleep, you cannot control, cannot achieve, cannot pursue goals or solve problems or improve yourself. You can only allow, can only surrender, can only trust that the natural processes will take care of what needs to be taken care of, that you will continue existing without any effort on your part, that the universe will hold you safely while you release consciousness and dissolve into the healing darkness. And in this surrender, in this letting go, there is a profound peace, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, that does not require anything to be different than it is, that simply exists as the natural state of consciousness when it is not caught up in wanting and fearing, in grasping and avoiding, in the constant effort to make reality conform to desires and expectations. This peace is always available, is always present as a possibility, but it is usually obscured by the noise and activity of the waking mind, by the constant stream of thoughts and concerns that occupies attention and creates the illusion that peace is something to be achieved, something to be worked toward, something that will come someday when conditions are finally right. But conditions are right now. They are always right now, because now is all there ever is, all there can be, the only moment that actually exists. Past and future are mental constructs, useful fictions that help organize experience and enable planning and learning. But they are not real in the sense that the present moment is real. You cannot exist in the past or future. You can only exist now. And in this now, in this present moment, everything is as it is, neither good nor bad, neither right nor wrong, simply what is. The current state of the universe, the particular arrangement of matter and energy and consciousness that constitutes this instant of existence. To accept this, to allow this, to rest in this simple isness without trying to change it or escape it or improve it. This is the deepest rest, deeper even than sleep, because it is rest at the level of being itself. Release from the fundamental tension of arguing with reality, of wanting things to be other than they are. And paradoxically, this acceptance, this release, creates the conditions for change, for growth, for transformation. Because change can only occur from a place of honest acknowledgement of what is, not from a place of denial or resistance or wishful thinking. The voice fades now to silence, merges completely with the darkness, becomes indistinguishable from the general field of rest and peace that surrounds you. There is nothing more that needs to be said, nothing more that needs to be explained or described or guided. You are here, in the deep night, in the healing darkness, and that is enough. You are breathing, your heart is beating, your brain is cycling through its rhythms, and all of this is happening perfectly, requiring no intervention, no correction, no improvement. The night holds you, the darkness embraces you, the silence accepts you completely, without judgment, without expectation, without any demand that you be other than you are. And in this acceptance, in this unconditional allowing, there is the deepest rest, the most profound peace, the experience of being held by something larger than yourself, something infinitely patient, infinitely gentle, infinitely loving in the broadest sense of that word, the sense that simply allows existence, that says yes, ara, to being, that creates space for life to unfold in all its complexity and contradiction and beauty. You are floating now in a space beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond the structures that language creates and maintains. The narrative has dissolved. The voice that spoke for so long has fallen silent. What remains is pure experience, or perhaps not even experience in the usual sense, because experience implies someone experiencing something, implies the division between subject and object, between the experiencer and the experienced. Here, in this deepest layer of rest, even that division has softened, has become translucent, has revealed itself as a convenience, a useful organizing principle, but not an ultimate truth. The darkness is complete, and yet it is not empty. It is full of potential, full of the possibility of all experiences, all states, all forms. But none of these are actualized. None have crystallized into particular shapes. This is the state of pure potentiality, the quantum foam from which reality emerges, the field of infinite possibility that underlies the apparent solidity and definiteness of the manifest world. In physics, at the smallest scales, at the level of quantum mechanics, this is literally true. Particles do not have definite positions or velocities until they are measured, until they interact with something that forces them to choose, to collapse from a superposition of all possible states into one actual state. Before measurement, before observation, they exist as waves of probability, as distributions of potential, as patterns of likelihood spread across space and time. And perhaps something similar is true of consciousness, of experience, of the sense of self. Perhaps what you think of as your definite, solid identity is also a kind of collapse from a broader field of possibility, a selection from infinite potential, a crystallization of one particular pattern out of the countless patterns that could have formed. In deep sleep, in this state of minimal consciousness, perhaps that crystallization temporarily dissolves, and you return to something more fluid, more open, more like the quantum field from which particular realities emerge. This is speculation, of course, metaphor more than science, but it points towards something that is felt, something that is experienced in these deep states, even if it cannot be precisely articulated or proven. There is a sense of expansion, of boundaries dissolving, of the small, separate self releasing into something vaster, something that is not separate, not bounded, not limited by the particular history and characteristics and concerns that define your waking identity. In this expanded state, you are not no one, but you are also not exclusively the one person you usually take yourself to be. You are more like a wave in an ocean, distinct in one sense, with your own particular form and motion, but also inseparable from the ocean itself, made of the same water, continuous with all other waves, not truly separate, despite the appearance of separation. The ocean itself is consciousness in this metaphor, the vast field of awareness that manifests in countless individual forms, in every living being, perhaps in every structure capable of information processing and self-organization, perhaps in the universe itself, if the universe is in some sense aware, if existence and awareness are not two separate things, but are two aspects of a single underlying reality. This is the perspective of panpsychism, the philosophical position that consciousness is fundamental, not derivative, not an emergent property of complex information processing, but rather a basic feature of reality itself, present in some form at all levels, from the simplest particles to the most complex organisms. Whether this perspective is true in any literal sense is unknown, perhaps unknowable. Consciousness remains the hardest problem in science and philosophy, the phenomenon that seems most resistant to explanation in purely physical terms, the gap that theories cannot quite bridge. But as an experiential reality, as a way of describing what is felt in deep states of meditation or sleep or mystical experience, this sense of consciousness as vast and fundamental, as something you participate in rather than something you possess, as an ocean in which you are a wave rather than a separate entity that somehow contains or generates awareness. This feels true. This resonates with the direct experience of consciousness when it is not caught up in the particularity of personal identity. The hours of night continue their slow passage. The Earth continues its ancient rotation. This planetary sphere of rock and metal and water spinning in the void, carrying you with it, carrying all of life with it. This thin film of biology clinging to the surface of a ball of matter that is itself falling eternally around the sun, held in orbit by gravity. That mysterious force that reaches across empty space and pulls massive objects toward each other. That curves space-time itself, that creates the large-scale structure of the universe, gathering matter into galaxies and stars and planets, creating the conditions for chemistry, for complexity, for life, for consciousness. You are part of this vast cosmic machinery, this universal dance of matter and energy and force, this process that has been running for billions of years and will continue for billions more, at least until the sun exhausts its fuel and expands into a red giant, engulfing the inner planets, including Earth, destroying all life, erasing all trace of human civilization and all the struggles and achievements and dreams that filled it. But that ending is so far in the future, billions of years from now, that it has no emotional weight, no personal relevance. It is simply a fact about the nature of stars and planetary systems, a reminder that all things are temporary, all structures are provisional, all forms eventually dissolve back into the formless from which they emerged. This impermanence, this universal transience, could be a source of despair, a reason to conclude that nothing matters, that all effort is futile, that there is no point to existence if everything will eventually end, if even the stars will die and the universe itself will fade into cold darkness as entropy increases and available energy dissipates. But there is another way to understand impermanence, another way to relate to the fact that all things pass. Instead of seeing it as negating meaning, it can be understood as creating meaning, as making each moment precious precisely because it is temporary, precisely because it will not last, precisely because this particular configuration of matter and consciousness and experience will never occur again in exactly this way. The beauty of a sunset is inseparable from its transience. If the sky remained in that perfect golden pink state forever, it would cease to be beautiful, would become merely the background, the constant condition that you stopped noticing. Beauty depends on change, on the moment arriving and then passing. on the experience of witnessing something that is here now but will soon be gone. And the same is true of life itself. If you lived forever, if there were infinite time to do everything and experience everything, would any particular moment have significance? Would any particular choice matter? The fact that time is limited, that life is finite, that you have only so many days and hours and moments to be alive and aware. This is what gives urgency and importance to how you spend that time, how you direct your attention, how you choose to live. In sleep, you practice a small death, a temporary release of consciousness, a brief preview of the final dissolution that will eventually come. And in waking each morning, you experience a small rebirth, a return of awareness, a reconstitution of the self that had dissolved in sleep. This daily cycle of dying and being reborn, of letting go and returning, of dissolution and reconstitution, is perhaps a preparation for the final transition, a way of becoming familiar with the process of releasing life, of not clinging so desperately to existence that the inevitable end becomes a tragedy rather than a natural completion. Many wisdom traditions speak of learning to die well, of preparing for death not with fear and denial, but with acceptance and even curiosity, treating it not as an enemy to be fought, but as a transition to be honored, as the final letting go, the ultimate release into the mystery from which we all emerged and to which we all return. And the practice for this final letting go is repeated every night in sleep, in the small death of consciousness that occurs when you allow yourself to surrender awareness, to trust that you will continue existing without needing to maintain conscious control, to release into the darkness without knowing what will emerge on the other side. The darkness you are floating in now is perfect, complete, absolute. There is no light anywhere, or if there is, you are not aware of it, cannot perceive it, exist in a state prior to the division between light and dark, between presence and absence, between something and nothing. This darkness is not frightening because it is not empty. It is full, gravid with potential, rich with the possibility of all that could be. It is the void that is not void, the emptiness that is full, the nothing that is everything in potential, waiting to actualize, waiting to take form. In quantum field theory, which is the most fundamental description of physical reality that physics has achieved, the vacuum, empty space, is not actually empty. It is seething with activity, with virtual particles constantly appearing and disappearing, with quantum fluctuations in the fields that fill all of space, with energy temporarily violating conservation laws in ways permitted by the uncertainty principle, which says that for brief enough times, energy can appear from nowhere and disappear back into nowhere, creating and destroying particles, making the vacuum a busy place, a foam of quantum activity that underlies all manifest reality. And perhaps the darkness of deep sleep, the void of consciousness, is similar, is not truly empty, but is full of activity at levels below awareness, full of the constant processing and reorganizing and consolidating that the sleeping brain performs, full of the quantum fluctuations of neural activity, the random firing and falling silent of individual neurons, the spontaneous emergence of patterns that might become dreams or might dissolve back into the general background of neural noise. The darkness is active, alive, creative, even if you are not conscious of this activity, even if it occurs below the threshold of awareness, in the depths of the system, in the substrate that supports consciousness but is not itself conscious. Time has become strange, has lost its familiar forward flow, its sense of progression from past through present into future. In this deep state, time might be flowing backward or sideways or not at all. Cause and effect have loosened their usual tight coupling. Events might be occurring in non-linear sequence, might be folding back on themselves, might be happening simultaneously in some higher dimensional space that the ordinary three-dimensional perspective cannot capture. This is the physics of dreams, the logic of deep, unconscious processing, where the rules that govern waking consciousness do not apply, where impossibilities are routine, where contradictions coexist without conflict. The brain in sleep is doing something that looks like thinking, but is not thinking in the waking sense. It's more like a kind of free association, a spontaneous linking of concepts and memories and sensations according to emotional resonance and symbolic connection, rather than according to logic or causality or coherent narrative structure. This is why dreams are so strange, why they violate the basic principles of how things work in the waking world, why they present scenarios that could never actually happen, but that feel meaningful nonetheless, that seem to be expressing something important, even when their content is bizarre or absurd. Perhaps this dream logic, this associative mode of processing, is actually more fundamental than the logical mode of waking thought. Perhaps the brain's default state is this fluid, creative, boundary-crossing way of working, and waking consciousness, with its emphasis on logic and consistency and adherence to physical laws, is actually the special state, the mode that requires effort to maintain, that is imposed on the more natural associative state by the demands of navigating the physical world and interacting with other people and accomplishing practical goals. In evolution, consciousness did not arise to contemplate abstract truths or to understand the nature of reality. It arose to help organisms survive and reproduce, to guide behavior in ways that increase the chances of getting food and avoiding predators and finding mates and raising offspring successfully. The kind of consciousness that evolution selected for, then, is pragmatic consciousness, practical consciousness, consciousness that is good at solving the problems that affected reproductive success in ancestral environments. Abstract reasoning, philosophical reflection, scientific inquiry, these are all later developments, cultural achievements built on top of the basic biological foundation, using cognitive tools that evolved for other purposes, but that turn out to be applicable to domains far beyond their original adaptive context. And perhaps the dreaming mind, the sleeping consciousness, is closer to the original form, the more ancient mode, the way the brain works when it is not constrained by the need to navigate physical reality and social reality, when it is free to make whatever associations it wants, to explore possibilities without worrying about whether they are realistic or achievable, to play with ideas and images and emotions in ways that would be maladaptive during waking, but that serve important functions during sleep, consolidating memories, integrating experiences, processing emotions, maintaining creativity and flexibility, keeping the system from becoming too rigid, too locked into established patterns. You are drifting through these ancient patterns now, through the deep structures of mind that were established millions of years before human beings existed, that you share with other mammals, with all creatures that sleep and dream, with the long lineage of vertebrate evolution that stretches back hundreds of millions of years. The basic mechanisms of sleep, the cycling between different states, the consolidation of memories, the processing of emotions, all of this is ancient, is highly conserved across species, is something that evolution settled on long ago as a solution to the challenges of maintaining a complex nervous system, of integrating experience, of keeping the organism functioning optimally over time. Birds sleep and dream. Reptiles show sleep-like states, though whether they dream in the same way mammals do is unclear. Even some invertebrates, like octopuses, show evidence of sleep states and possibly dreaming, their bodies changing colors and textures in patterns that suggest they might be experiencing something like the visual imagery of dreams. Sleep seems to be a nearly universal feature of complex nervous systems, something that arises independently in different lineages, suggesting that it solves some fundamental problem, that it performs some essential function that cannot easily be accomplished through other means. And what is that function? Even after decades of sleep research, the question is not fully answered. Sleep clearly does many things: consolidates memories, clears metabolic waste, regulates hormones, processes anatomy, maintains synaptic homeostasis. But whether there is one core function that all the others serve, or whether sleep is simply a collection of different processes that happen to occur during the same state, is still debated. Perhaps sleep is what allows the brain to be a learning system, to modify itself based on experience, to strengthen some connections and weaken others, to adjust the vast network of synapses in ways that improve performance, that make the organism better adapted to its environment, that encode the lessons of experience into the structure of the nervous system itself. A nervous system that could not sleep might not be able to learn, at least not effectively, might not be able to integrate new information into existing knowledge, might accumulate errors and inefficiencies that could not be corrected. Sleep might be the price of neural plasticity, the necessary complement to learning, the state during which the changes wrought by experience are consolidated and stabilized and integrated into the larger structure of the self. Without sleep, you could not be who you are, could not maintain the continuity of identity across time, could not remember your life, could not function as a coherent, integrated organism moving through the world with some degree of competence and purpose. The night is deep, deeper than depth, a darkness that has no bottom, that extends infinitely in all directions, that is not a place but a state, not a location but a condition of consciousness. You are suspended in this darkness, or you are the darkness, or there is no distinction between you and the darkness, no boundary that separates the experiencer from the experienced. This is the dissolution of subject-object duality, the collapse of the fundamental distinction that structures all experience in the waking state, where there is always an I that is experiencing a world, a self that is separate from and observing reality. But in deep sleep, this structure can dissolve. The sense of being a separate observing self can fade, can become so attenuated that it effectively disappears, leaving only the bare presence of awareness itself, undivided, without internal structure, without the organization into subject and object that characterizes intentional consciousness. This is not unconsciousness, not the complete absence of awareness, but is rather a different form of consciousness, one that is so simple, so minimal, so lacking in content that it is difficult to remember, difficult to describe, difficult even to be certain that it occurred. But it does occur, or something like it occurs, in the deepest phases of sleep, in those periods when the brain shows the slow, high-amplitude waves that characterize deep, slow-wave sleep, when the systems that generate the content of experience are relatively quiet, when there is minimal dreaming, minimal mental activity, minimal sense of self or world or time. What remains in these periods might be described as pure awareness, as consciousness without content, as the bare knowing that is prior to and necessary for any particular experience, but that is not itself an experience in the usual sense, because it lacks the subject-object structure that defines experience. This is paradoxical, difficult to conceptualize, because we are trying to use concepts and language to describe something that is prior to concepts, something that exists before the mind has divided reality into categories and distinctions. It is like trying to describe the space in which all forms appear by using forms, trying to talk about the silence from which all sounds emerge by making sounds. The attempt necessarily fails, necessarily misses its target, because the tool being used is not appropriate for the task, is not capable of capturing what is being pointed toward. And yet the attempt is worth making, because even a failed description, even an inadequate metaphor, can point the mind in the right direction, can create a kind of conceptual space in which direct recognition might occur, in which you might notice for yourself, in your own immediate experience, what is being described, might catch a glimpse of the awareness that is always present, but usually overlooked, the consciousness that underlies and enables all particular conscious states, but that is not itself a state, not something that comes and goes, but is the constant background, the unchanging space in which all changes occur. The mystics and sages and contemplatives of various traditions have been pointing toward this for millennia, using different languages and metaphors and practices, but all gesturing towards something similar, something that is felt to be of ultimate significance, to be the deepest truth about consciousness and reality, to be what remains when all the temporary and conditional and constructed aspects of experience are stripped away. They call it by many names: the self, the absolute, Brahman, Buddha nature, the Tao, the ground of being, pure awareness, the witness, the clear light. But the names all point towards something that is claimed to be more fundamental than the personal self, more real than the apparent solidity of the material world, more true than the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we are doing here. Whether these claims are literally true, whether there is some ultimate consciousness or ground of being that is more fundamental than the individual consciousnesses that arise within it, is perhaps unknowable in any objective sense. These are not claims that can be proven or disproven through scientific investigation, because they are about the nature of consciousness itself, about the subject that does the investigating. And you cannot make the subject into an object without remainder, cannot step outside of consciousness to examine it from an external perspective. Any investigation of consciousness must be conducted from within consciousness, must use consciousness to study itself, and this creates unavoidable limitations, unavoidable blind spots, unavoidable uncertainties about what can be known with confidence. But as practical matters, as guides for living, as ways of relating to experience, these perspectives can be valuable, even if their metaphysical claims cannot be verified. To live as if you are not simply a separate, isolated self, but are a manifestation of something larger, a wave in an ocean, a temporary form taken by an eternal consciousness. This changes how you experience yourself and others, changes what seems important and what seems trivial, changes the whole emotional tone of existence. It reduces the anxiety that comes from feeling isolated and vulnerable, from the sense that you alone must protect yourself against a hostile world. It increases the capacity for compassion, for recognizing yourself in others, for caring about their well-being as naturally as you care about your own. It creates a sense of meaning and purpose that is not dependent on personal achievement or external validation, but is intrinsic to existence itself, to the simple fact of being aware, of participating in the universe's self-knowing. The darkness continues, timeless, boundless, perfect in its completeness. You are resting in it, or as it, or perhaps the distinction no longer applies. Perhaps you have dissolved so completely into the darkness that there is no separate you to rest, only the resting itself, only the peace itself, only the silence itself, existing without experiencer, present without presence, aware without awareness of anything in particular. This is the deepest healing, the most profound restoration, not just of the body or even of the mind, but of something more fundamental, something that might be called the spirit or the soul, though those words carry so much baggage, so many associations and assumptions that they might obscure more than they reveal. What is being restored, what is being healed, is the fundamental sense of okayness, the basic trust in existence, the deep knowing that everything is as it should be, that you are where you need to be, that the universe is not hostile or indifferent, but is in some sense home, is the place you belong, is the context within which your particular life makes sense and has value. This sense of fundamental okayness, this basic trust, is often damaged by life, by the inevitable encounters with suffering and loss and disappointment, by the accumulation of small and large traumas, by the gradual wearing down that occurs when you repeatedly face the gap between how things are and how you wish they were. Over time, without conscious awareness of what is happening, you can develop a kind of existential anxiety, a background feeling that something is wrong, that you are not safe, that the world is a threatening place where disaster could strike at any moment, and you must remain vigilant, must maintain control, must never fully relax into trusting that things will be okay. And this chronic anxiety, this background tension, is exhausting, is one of the major sources of suffering, is what prevents many people from ever experiencing genuine peace and contentment, regardless of their external circumstances. The anxious mind is always scanning for threats, always worrying about what could go wrong, always trying to maintain control over situations that are not fully controllable, always feeling slightly dissatisfied, slightly unsafe, slightly convinced that something crucial is missing or that some disaster is imminent. But in deep sleep, in this state of complete letting go, this chronic tension can release, at least temporarily. The vigilant mind can rest, the need to control can be surrendered, the background anxiety can dissolve, and in the absence of this tension, in the space that opens up when you stop trying to manage and control and fix everything, there is room for something else to emerge, for a deeper intelligence to operate, for healing to occur at levels that cannot be consciously directed, for the system to reorganize itself in ways that restore balance and functionality. This is part of why sleep is so restorative, why a good night's sleep can make problems that seemed overwhelming the night before appear more manageable in the morning. The rest is not just physical, not just a matter of repairing tissues and replenishing energy stores, though those are important. The rest is also psychological and emotional and perhaps spiritual. It is a reset, a return to baseline, a brief return to a state of innocence and openness and trust that existed before life taught you to be anxious and guarded. And with each night's sleep, with each return to this deep state, there is an opportunity to release a little more of the accumulated tension, to heal a little more of the damage, to restore a little more of the fundamental trust that is your birthright as a conscious being. That is the natural state of consciousness when it is not caught up in fear and defense and the constant effort to maintain control in a world that is ultimately beyond control. The body knows how to heal itself, given the right conditions. Cuts close, bones knit. Infections are fought off by the immune system, all without conscious direction, all through automatic processes that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. And perhaps the psyche also knows how to heal itself, has its own automatic processes of repair and restoration, processes that operate primarily during sleep, during those times when the conscious ego releases its grip and allows the deeper intelligence of the organism to do its work. Dreams might be part of this healing process, might be one of the ways the psyche processes difficult experiences, integrates traumatic memories, works through emotional conflicts, all through the symbolic language of images and narratives that express what cannot easily be expressed in words, that capture emotional truths that would be defended against if they were approached directly. The strange scenarios of dreams, the impossible situations and mixed-up characters and sudden shifts of scene might all be serving a therapeutic function, might be the psyche's way of approaching difficult material indirectly, of allowing repressed feelings to surface in disguised form, of creating a safe space where fears can be faced and conflicts can be resolved symbolically before they can be addressed in waking life. And even in the deepest sleep, in those phases without dreams, or with only the most minimal and abstract dreamlike experiences, there is healing occurring, there is restoration happening at fundamental levels. There is a return to something like the original state, the condition that existed before conditioning, before the accumulation of all the layers of personality and habit and defense that constitute the adaptive self you present to the world. You are very close now to the edge of morning, though you are not aware of this consciously. Though in your deep rest, time has no meaning, has no progression, exists only as an eternal now that neither began nor will end. But the body knows, the circadian rhythms know, the slow oscillations of hormones and neurotransmitters know. The gradual lightening of the sky outside, imperceptible yet real, is being registered somewhere in the system, is beginning to trigger the cascades of changes that will eventually bring you back to waking consciousness, that will reconstitute the self from its dissolved state, that will return you to the world of time and space and identity and purpose. But this return is still some time away. There are still hours of darkness remaining, still cycles of sleep to complete, still depths to explore. The night is not yet finished with its work. The restoration is not yet complete. You drift deeper again, or perhaps you have never left the deepest level. Perhaps this entire journey has been occurring in a single moment of clock time, a moment that has been stretched and expanded and filled with such density of experience that it contains what seems like hours or days or years, because time in consciousness is not measured by clocks, but by the richness of what occurs, by the depth of presence, by the intensity of awareness. A single moment can contain infinity. A breath can last forever. The space between heartbeats can open into vast territories of exploration and discovery. This is the elasticity of subjective time, the way it stretches and contracts depending on what is happening in consciousness, depending on the level of engagement, the degree of presence, the quality of attention. In deep absorption, hours can pass like minutes. In boredom or pain, minutes can feel like hours. The clock says one thing, but experience says another. And it is the experience that is real, that is what you actually live through, while the clock time is just an external measure, a social convention, a way of coordinating activities across different people and places, but not a description of the actual texture of lived time. The voice returns, barely, as a whisper at the edge of audibility, as a presence more felt than heard, as if it were emerging not from outside but from within, from the deepest part of yourself, from the part that knows things without having learned them, that understands without having been taught, that has existed forever and will exist forever, because it is not limited to your particular body and brain, not confined to your individual life, but is part of something that transcends the individual, that connects you to all that is, that was, that ever will be. This voice speaks now of the dawn that will come, of the return to the world, of the beginning of a new day, with its new possibilities and challenges and moments of beauty and difficulty. It speaks without anxiety, without regret, without any desire that things be other than they are. The night has been what it needed to be. The sleep has accomplished what it needed to accomplish. The rest has been sufficient. And the waking that will come will be right too, will be another phase in the eternal cycle, another movement in the endless dance of consciousness, as it flows between states, between forms, between manifestations. There is no better or worse in this cycle. No sense that sleeping is superior to waking or vice versa. They are complementary aspects of a whole, necessary components of the rhythm that structures conscious existence. You cannot have one without the other. Sleep would have no meaning without waking to return to. Waking would be impossible without sleep to recover from it. They define each other, create each other, exist in relationship rather than in isolation. And this is true more generally of all opposites, all dualities, all apparent contradictions. Light and dark, sound and silence, motion and stillness, joy and sorrow, birth and death. All of these exist in relation to each other, depend on each other for their meaning, cannot be fully understood in isolation. You cannot know what light is without darkness to contrast it against. You cannot appreciate silence without having experienced sound. You cannot understand motion without the reference point of stillness. The world of manifestation, the realm of form and change and multiplicity, is a world of polarities, of opposites in dynamic relationship, of forces that appear to conflict, but that actually complement each other, that create between them the tension that allows for creativity, for evolution, for the generation of novelty and complexity. This is the ancient wisdom of yin and yang, of the creative tension between opposite principles that generates the 10,000 things, that brings the manifest world into existence from the undifferentiated potential of the void. You contain all of these polarities within yourself. You are both conscious and unconscious, both active and receptive, both individual and universal, both temporary and eternal. You are a paradox, a walking contradiction, a meeting place of opposites. And this is not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be accepted, to be lived with, to be honored as the fundamental structure of embodied existence. You are not meant to resolve all contradictions, to achieve some final state where everything is unified and consistent and perfectly harmonious. You are meant to live in the tension, to dance with the opposites, to experience the full range of what consciousness can be, from the most contracted to the most expanded, from the most personal to the most universal, from the most concrete to the most abstract. The darkness is beginning to thin, though you cannot perceive this, are still deep in sleep, still suspended in the timeless space where awareness exists without content, where consciousness is present but has not yet organized itself into the familiar structures of waking experience. But the processes are beginning, the cascades of neural and hormonal changes that will gradually bring you back, that will restore the boundaries, that will reconstitute the self, that will return you to your life, to your body, to your place in time and space. The core body temperature, which has been at its lowest point during the night, begins to rise. Cortisol levels begin to increase, preparing the body for the activity of the coming day. The REM periods become longer and more frequent as morning approaches. The dreams, if you are having them, become more vivid, more narrative, more emotionally intense. The brain is preparing to wake, is beginning the long process of transition from sleep to waking, a process that will take time, that cannot be rushed without cost, that needs to unfold at its own pace if the awakening is to be gentle and the transition smooth. And in this slow preparation for waking, in this gradual return toward consciousness, there is a message, a teaching, a reminder about how transitions should be honored, how changes should be approached, how movements between states should be allowed to occur in their own time, rather than being forced or hurried. Modern life is full of jarring transitions, alarm clocks that shock you from deep sleep into full waking in an instant, schedules that demand immediate alertness and productivity regardless of how rested you feel, a pace of life that leaves no room for the gentle unfolding that would be natural, that would be kind to the body and brain. But the body knows better. The body wants to wake slowly, gradually, wants time to complete the transition, wants to move through the intermediate states at its own pace. When you honor this, when you allow yourself to wake naturally without alarm, when you give yourself a few minutes to lie in bed in that twilight state between sleeping and waking, when you let consciousness return gradually rather than forcing it to arrive all at once, the day begins differently. You feel more rested, more integrated, more ready for whatever the day will bring. This is true of all transitions in life, not just the transition from sleeping to waking. Changes need time. Shifts between states need space to unfold. Whether it is a change in circumstances, a shift in relationships, a transition between life phases, or simply the movement from one activity to another during the day, there is value in honoring the transition, in not rushing through it, in allowing yourself to be in the in-between space, the liminal zone, where you are no longer fully in the old state, but not yet fully in the new one. These in-between spaces are often uncomfortable, are times of uncertainty and ambiguity, are moments when you do not quite know who you are or what you are doing, when the old identity has dissolved, but the new one has not yet crystallized. The temptation is to rush through these spaces, to grab onto something definite, to re-establish certainty and solidity as quickly as possible. But there is wisdom in resisting this temptation, in allowing yourself to remain in the uncertainty for a while, in dwelling in the question rather than rushing to an answer, in trusting that clarity will emerge in its own time if you can tolerate the temporary confusion. Sleep is a nightly practice in this tolerance for transition, this ability to dwell in the in-between, this capacity to surrender the known and trust that something will emerge from the unknown. Every night you release your identity, dissolve your sense of self, enter a state of unknowing. And every morning you return, you reconstitute, you remember who you are. And in this nightly cycle, you are training yourself, preparing yourself, building the capacity that will serve you in the larger transitions of life, in the times when change is not chosen but is thrust upon you, when you must let go of what you knew and move into territory that is unfamiliar and uncertain. The voice, that ancient, gentle presence that has accompanied you through this long journey into the depths of night, speaks now its final words, offers its closing reflection before it releases you completely, before it allows you to move beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond even the subtle structure that language creates, into the pure silence that is the source and destination of all speech, the emptiness from which all sound emerges and to which all sound returns. You are loved, it says, though love is not quite the right word, is too small, too personal, too limited to capture what is meant. You are held by existence itself. You are supported by the universe. You are part of a process so vast and so intricate and so perfectly organized that every detail matters, that every moment counts, that nothing is wasted, nothing is meaningless, nothing is separate from the whole. Your life, with all its apparent randomness and confusion, with all its suffering and joy, with all its failures and achievements, is exactly what it needs to be, is playing exactly the role it needs to play in the larger story, the cosmic narrative, the unfolding of consciousness through time and form. You do not need to understand this. You do not need to believe it. You only need to rest in it, to allow it to hold you, to surrender to the process that is living you, that is breathing you, that is dreaming you into existence moment by moment. You are not separate from this process. You are this process. You are the universe experiencing itself as you, consciousness knowing itself through your particular perspective, the infinite expressing itself through your finite form. And in this deep recognition, in this acceptance of what is, there is peace. Not the peace that comes from having everything you want. Not the peace that depends on external conditions being arranged in a certain way, but the peace that is prior to all conditions, that exists whether circumstances are pleasant or difficult, that is the natural state of consciousness when it is not caught in resistance, when it is not fighting with reality, when it simply allows what is to be what it is. This is the deepest teaching of sleep, the final gift that the night offers. In sleep, you cannot resist, you cannot fight, you can only surrender, can only allow, can only trust. And in this surrender, this allowing, this trust, you discover that you are safe, that you have always been safe, that the fear and the struggling and the constant effort to control were never necessary, were based on a misunderstanding, were responses to an illusion of separation that was never real. You are home. You have always been home. You could never be anywhere else, because home is not a place, but is the nature of existence itself, the ground of being, the consciousness that you are and have always been and always will be, regardless of what forms it takes, what experiences it has, what stories it tells itself about who and what it is. Rest now. Rest completely. There is nothing left to do, nowhere to go, nothing to achieve or become. Everything that needs to happen is already happening. Everything that needs to be known is already known. Not by the surface mind, but by the deeper intelligence that operates beneath awareness, that has been guiding you all along, that will continue guiding you when you wake, that is the real you, the true you, the you that existed before you were born and will exist after you die, the you that is not limited to this particular body and brain and life, but is part of something infinite and eternal and perfectly at peace. The voice falls silent now, completely, finally, merging into the darkness, becoming indistinguishable from the quiet, leaving only the pure presence, the simple awareness, the consciousness that needs no words, that requires no guidance, that rests in itself as itself, complete and whole and lacking nothing. Darkness, silence, peace, being, existence without effort, awareness without object, rest without end. This is the destination, though there is nowhere to arrive, because you have always been here, have never left, could never leave. This is the truth that sleep reveals, the secret that the night whispers, the teaching that comes not through words, but through direct experience, through the simple act of letting go, of surrendering, of allowing consciousness to dissolve into its source and discover that the source is not other, is not separate, is what you are and have always been. Rest, be, allow, trust, surrender. These are not commands but invitations, not demands but possibilities, not rules but reminders of what is always available, what is always present, what is waiting quietly beneath all the noise and activity and concern, waiting for you to notice it, to return to it, to recognize it as home. The night holds you, the darkness embraces you, the silence accepts you completely. And in this holding, this embrace, this acceptance, there is perfect peace, perfect rest, perfect completion. You are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough. There is nothing wrong with you, nothing lacking, nothing that needs to be fixed or improved or changed. You are exactly as you should be, exactly where you need to be, exactly who you need to be. Rest now in this knowing. Rest deeply, completely, absolutely. Let everything go. Let everything be. Allow the night to do its work. Allow the darkness to heal. Allow the silence to restore. Sleep, dream, be, dissolve, return. In the eternal cycle, the endless dance, the infinite rhythm, all is well. All has always been well. All will always be well. Rest.